Geno Smith returns to New York to save Aaron Glenn's job on the New York Jets. Yeah, this'll work. F it. What could go wrong? What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the reveal of the number 28 team in my preseason power rankings, as today we will take a deep dive into the New York Jets, a team with a very fascinating season ahead and a very important second year for Aaron Glenn, who just might head into the year with the hottest of seats among NFL head coaches. So a lot to get into here today. We'll go through it all, the coaching staff, the roster, some of my predictions for this team as well. Before we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor, please take just a second and hit that like button down below if you enjoy the deep dive series. If you enjoy today's video, please do that. It really does help me out, and it takes just a second. And of course, if you are not, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of these deep dives throughout the course of the summer as we lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. And also, to get ahead of it, I think a lot of people are going to be saying, where's Connor Rogers this year? We had Connor last year for the Jets deep dive, going to be holding his spot for next year. I believe him and his wife literally just had a baby. So congrats to Connor on that, and looking forward to having you back next year, buddy. But let's go ahead and get started. As we do in this series, we go through every aspect of the team, position by position, and begin with the coaching staff. And as we begin each section of the video, we take a look at their offseason changes in that spot and ask the big question, did they get better, worse, or stay the same? And as far as the coaching staff here, I hinted at it earlier, but it is a big second season for Aaron Glenn, as they are making some changes with both coordinators on the offensive and defensive side of things. And this was guaranteed to be the case because they already fired Tanner Engstrand and Steve Wilks mid-season last year. Now Aaron Glenn is the prominent defensive mind and ultimately responsible for this defense taking into shape here in year two. But we knew there was going to be some new coordinators stepping in, and they choose to go with Frank Reich, of all people. Interesting choice. We'll break down Frank Reich and how I think of that hire and what his scheme kind of looks like in just a second here. And then Brian Duker is brought up interdivision from Miami to be the kind of assistant defensive coach there to Aaron Glenn. Now, I said neutral on these coaching changes. You're going from a midseason fire at offensive coordinator to a shaky hire in Frank Reich, so call it TBD at best. And then, again, the defensive side of things, changing of names, but this ultimately falls on Aaron Glenn. And as we really dive into this coaching staff, it's a ever important year for Aaron Glenn, who was hired last year, and I myself in this deep dive series voiced some concerns if he was the best hire, and I think we saw a lot of my concerns in year one. Number one was the fact that, yes, he is an exciting coach to play for and brings a lot of that rah-rah energy, and even had some moments with the dancing on the sideline. And I still consider Glenn a player-friendly coach, and I'm not saying he's lost this locker room, but he was underneath the whole kneecap-biting umbrella in Detroit, and it was going to be a big challenge for him to come over and replicate that culture here with the Jets. And I would say in terms of results, where this was one of the worst defenses in the league last year, especially from a pass defense standpoint, I will give him some credit. The run defense wasn't horrible for most of last year until it did fade away at the end of the season, where they did allow over 120 yards on the ground in 4 of their last 5 games. But that is something that he's going to have to prove this year, is that he can create the toughness that is really what you are seeking as Aaron Glenn's prominent trait, as a defensive mind, but moreover a culture builder. Because one of the other questions I had about Aaron Glenn is that I don't know that I consider Aaron Glenn a prominent defensive mind from a X's and O's standpoint. I frankly was never really impressed by the scheme that they ran in Detroit, or them throwing a lot of complicated blitz schemes at teams, or adjusting as players got hurt, or being able to be multiple as a defense. They ran what they ran in Detroit, which was an extension of that New Orleans Dennis Allen philosophy. Press man coverage, a lot of base defense. And when they lost players and when teams figured them out, under Aaron Glenn, and we've still seen this in Detroit, there was never really a whole lot of adjustments and flexibility. And I, again, just have questions about Aaron Glenn as an overall defensive schemer. And we certainly saw that, as this was one of the worst pass defenses last year. They infamously did not intercept a single pass last year when this is a defensive backs coach that has climbed the ranks. So, yes, I did have some questions about Aaron Glenn as a hire, and as we head into year 2, I have yet to see anything that really would change me off course of having that opinion. Does that mean he can't prove me wrong and have a really good year here now that he's been able to really build this defense in his image? He obviously came in and would have played a large role in those big decisions to trade away guys like Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, to spend the number 2 pick in the draft on David Bailey. He has handpicked, and a lot of free agent signings that we'll see here as well. He has handpicked the types of players he wants for this defense, and I'm going into this year with an open mind. Those of you that watch this channel know that I will always admit when I'm wrong and do give these guys a chance to prove me wrong, and I've laid out my opinion. I'm not a huge Aaron Glenn believer. He does come in as my 32nd ranked head coach for the 2026 season. But there's still some interesting aspects of this team that I'm willing to open up the door for possibilities for Aaron Glenn to really build this defense in his image and create that toughness with this team. But I would be lying if someone made me bet who's the first head coach fired. I would have to put that money on Aaron Glenn. This is my 28th ranked team. We're going to get into predictions and the upside and avenues that things could go right for this team, but it really was about as bad as you could have hoped for. It was just short of like a Urban Meyer or Nathaniel Hackett level of a bad hire, or a Frank Reich in Carolina, ironically, bad hire. It was maybe just short of that, but it was about as bad as you could have imagined. And if they would have fired him after one season, I don't think anybody really would have questioned that. So an absolute critical season for Aaron Glenn to prove that he's got the chops to be a head coach in this league, and that he isn't more of a defensive coordinator type where, again, I didn't even really view him as one of the 20 or so best defensive minds when he was in Detroit. And with that, I should mention where I have Glenn and the Jets ranked for their defensive coach rankings that we assigned for this series. I did praise that run defense. I mean, this was a pretty abysmal roster, and they still finished top half in the league in run defense DVOA. And if you do go back to what they did in Detroit, while I had questions about the pass defense and all of that we talked about, the flexibility, adjusting things on the back end, scheming up more creative blitz looks, they always were dominant against the run, and he is not afraid to get into base defense, vary his fronts. I think he does have, even though he's a defensive background, I do think he brings a very good understanding of run fits and how to load up the line and stop the run at all costs on early downs. And I think we saw some early makings of that here with the Jets, where they did finish 16th in run defense DVOA last year. Respectable given the level of talent they had to work with. So very respectable rankings for run defense coaching for Aaron Glenn. He deserves praise there, ranking with a B+ grade, 7th to 10th in that regard. But yes, tied for that bottom tier of pass defense coaches. We don't need to rehash points. I've made my points there, but so much to prove in this passing league that Aaron Glenn can provide more than just toughness, loading up the box, run defense, physicality. And even then, we need to see some more of that here at the Jets. So I'm not the biggest believer in Aaron Glenn. I don't want to start this on this majorly negative note, but I'm also just not going to lie to you and give you an opinion that isn't true to how I feel about the coach. Now, before we go any further here, I want to thank the sponsor for today's deep dive, Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks platform. If you're dialed into NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, or maybe you're like me and you've really rediscovered your love for the game of baseball, well, Prize Picks lineups will keep you glued to your seat. You select your player's stats, whether it's points, strikeouts, goals, you name it. String together your lineup, picking more or less on those stats, and you get your chance at massive payouts. Prize Picks even has team picks now, where you can go ahead and pick the winner, the spread, the total on any major game, and that's available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. Another reason I'm excited to partner with Prize Picks is now you can follow along with my picks, whether it is those baseball lineups throughout the summer or, of course, getting into the stats and trying to pick winners during football season here on the channel. It's just at TFG_football, just like my Twitter handle. You can follow along with my picks on the social part of the Prize Picks app. So if you sign up today using code HMA, Prize Picks will also reward you with $50 in bonus lineups when you play your first $5 lineup there. Good luck, everybody. Please do play responsibly as well. And a big thanks to Prize Picks again for sponsoring today's deep dive. I do want to spend a little more time talking about what his scheme is, because that's important. And for better or worse, Aaron Glenn, like the Lions and a couple of other teams, are very unique in the sense that in a league filled with two shell quarters, kind of Fangio, McDonald style systems, even the Robert Saleh tree, all of those prominent defensive schemes that I'd have to add it up, but probably 26 or 27 teams in the league are in those families of schemes. Aaron Glenn comes from much more of that Dennis Allen, press man, physical, aggressive style. Now, over the years, we've seen Aaron Glenn, as far as the structure of their fronts, become an entirely multiple defense, whether, you want to get into 3-4 versus 4-3. We've really seen it all from Aaron Glenn. And when you break it down last year, the Jets ran the 12th most base personnel, so 4 defensive backs on the field. They ran the 12th most of that in the league, but it was almost a 50-50 split in terms of 3-4 versus 4-3. So we really did see that true multiple style. Now they hire Brian Duker, who has most recently really been under the Mike McDonald coaching tree, being under Wink Martindale in Baltimore, with Mike McDonald at the time, and then following under Anthony Weaver the last 2 years in Miami. That is much more of a true 3-4 philosophy, so we might see a little bit more of a shift towards those stand-up edge or traditional 3-4 style base fronts, but I fully expect it to still be mostly multiple, and a team that probably will once again be towards the top third of the league in terms of willingness to run base defense. Aaron Glenn did it all the time in Detroit. They were top 3. I think every year Aaron Glenn was in Detroit in terms of 4 defensive back base defenses. Last year, Detroit, the year after Aaron Glenn left, they leaned even further into it. They, in a league that nickel is the new base, like you've heard me say that a lot in this channel, along with other analysts. Detroit last year, their base was actually base. They ran a base defense over 60% of the time. So this coaching system, this structure, is known for not being afraid to load up the box, play heavy, stop the run so that you can really get to third down. And on third downs, that's where the Jets become a very blitz-happy, aggressive team. So the Jets overall were 14th in blitz rate last year, which isn't crazy. But first down blitz rate, they were 19th. Second down blitz rate, they were 22nd. So again, like leaning into base defense, trying to play more of that gap sound philosophy on the defense. But third down blitz rate, the Jets were third in the NFL. If they got you to third down, they were going to get after it. The problem is the Jets allowed the 5th most yards per blitz last year. They weren't an effective blitzing team, even if they blitzed a ton on third downs. And that was a disaster with this team. Yes, they had roster problems, but again, that's an area, that third down really is where the defensive coordinators can shine through, even with lesser roster talent, scheme up more phantom pressures, creative blitz looks that get through pass protection rules, show the ability to vary things on the back end and confuse quarterbacks. And the Jets just don't really do that. They're going to line up and run what they run. From a coverage scheme perspective, this is very much that, like, we want to play man-to-man type of a defense. Despite trading away Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams and not having a great pass rush in front of them, the Jets still ran the 9th most cover one in the NFL last year. So we did see that kind of stubborn philosophy from Aaron Glenn. And we're going to live by the sword, die by the sword. And last year, they absolutely died by the sword. And knowing Aaron Glenn and how he goes about things and that kind of no risk it, no biscuit philosophy that really came through Detroit there under Dan Campbell, I don't expect a whole lot of change. So it's going to be more on the players to really step up and elevate Aaron Glenn here. We'll see if that can work. But I fully expect that's going to be the philosophy we see here. And I think a big hope too is shouting out Brian Duker, at least maybe coming from that Mike McDonald and Wink Martindale coaching tree, maybe being able to bring some new ideas to the table in terms of making those blitzes more efficient when they do, and causing some more of that confusion and scheming up open rushers and that kind of stuff that is absolutely prominent in the Mike McDonald system, as we've seen around the league. But we do have to shift focus to the offensive coaching here under Frank Reich, where they are not going to receive very respectable rankings there either. And anybody that was forced to watch Frank Reich's last couple of years in charge of an offense, that's not going to come as much of a surprise. In fact, the Jets do come in alone, dead last for both offensive coach rankings, pass game and run game, square alone at 32nd. And that was one of those things that when I saw Jets hire Frank Reich as offensive coordinator, I couldn't believe the news that came across my timeline. I mean, it was such a clear-cut decision that last year in Indianapolis, when we saw the offensive line fall apart, a pretty good infrastructure that turned right back around under Shane Steichen, it was a pretty easy decision to let Reich go in Indianapolis. And then he gets fired in his first year with Carolina, really set Bryce Young down a avalanche that he's been trying to still recover from. And we also saw the same thing happen with Reich in Carolina, where he goes there with what on paper looked like a pretty good offensive line after the same thing happened in Indianapolis the year before. We thought that was a pretty good O-line, but they got, I think it was Matt Ryan that year, got Matt Ryan just literally killed into retirement that year. And then what looked like a good offensive line on paper in Carolina completely went away. And then both times Reich left, and the next year, both the Colts and the Panthers, those lines got mostly fixed overnight. And that's a huge thing to keep an eye on here. I know Frank Reich is not the offensive line coach, but whatever it is about his play calling, the way he runs his practice and his scheme, the offensive lines seem to get worse. And that was one of the strong suits of last year's Jets team. That would be terrible if Frank Reich comes in and breaks this offensive line. That might be the bright spot on the offense, but it's not just that. There just hasn't been a whole lot to write home about with Frank Reich. He does come from the Andy Reid coaching tree, which makes the Jets one of about 8 to 10 teams in the league that actually aren't a Shanahan-style offense. And that's probably noteworthy when you talk about the protection getting worse and stuff. This is much more of a, pro style, could mean so many different things, but it is much more a north and south offense. It doesn't use a lot of those philosophies that is a core reason why 2/3 of the league runs the Shanahan style offense, is when you come out and go play action and make the wide zone run game look like the pass. It gets defensive line moving east and west and lets old linemen lean into their athleticism. This is much more of a traditional, we're manning up on guys and we're going north and south. We're getting after each other, and it puts a lot more pressure on your offensive linemen. Now, being in more of a quote-unquote pro style or just non-Shanahan offense, that's what they tried to do last year with Tanner Engstrand. That's what the Lions are technically not a Shanahan system, though they do lean very heavily into wide zone and a lot of those Shanahan principles over there in Detroit. But this is kind of a continuation of that idea of we do things a little bit differently than the majority of the league. We want to be more of that Andy Reid kind of modern pro spread style offense, maybe a little bit more shotgun run game, a little bit more 2x2 style offense. That's historically been Frank Reich's kind of mantra, and maybe a little bit less of a wide zone run game and more of a gap centric, inside zone centric, beat you up front style approach, which can work. I'm not trying to say you have to run a Shanahan style offense. I'm just saying Frank Reich has shown that he's not exactly at the forefront of ingenuity and proving that you don't have to be a Shanahan style offense to have success in the NFL. So I'm suspect of this hire. I am, just like I was with Aaron Glenn to begin with. Would love to be wrong. I think Frank Reich 3 or 4 years ago was a much better coach. Maybe he has learned some things in another year off and is going to prove me wrong in that sense. But as we're going to get into this roster, there's actually a decent amount that I like. And in fact, a lot of people thought the Jets would be revealed already. So I want to let you guys know before you click off the video, like there's some promise here and some stuff that could really work with this Jets team, but I'm definitely suspicious that this is the right coaching staff to get things to go in that direction that they need to go in a big second year here. So there's my breakdown with the staff. But now let's start getting into this roster, and we'll begin with the quarterback room and take a look at their offseason changes. So they say goodbye to Justin Fields, a signing that went about as well as you probably thought it would. Not to dance on the grave that is Justin Fields' short Jets career, but I'm done at this point, talking about how Justin Fields' nickname should be more widely known as Justin Can't See the Fields. And then Tyrod Taylor also is going to head to Green Bay, who had to step in as a backup. But the big addition with the quarterbacks for the Jets here is Geno Smith, betting on a bounce-back year from Geno after really a nightmare season with the Las Vegas Raiders. And then they also do bring in Cade Klubnik in the 4th round of the draft. We'll talk a little bit about what I saw in him coming out. And as many questions as we might have on Geno Smith, I did still say slightly upgraded at quarterback because things were just that bad last year. But let's take a deeper look at this and really break things down. And Geno Smith is one of these players that is quite difficult to rank. This is a small sample size sport, and a sport that, especially for quarterbacks, is so contingent on surrounding cast and weapons and playmakers and offensive line, and he had none of that with the Raiders. What I do know is that in the 2+ years before last year, when he was on the Seahawks with a better infrastructure, Geno Smith was at worst a top 20 quarterback in the NFL. Now, I'm not ranking him as that. He has certainly fallen down in my rankings with the Jets coming in 26th at quarterback, but he gets that yellow arrow saying there is a chance.
You're telling me there's a chance
that this works out. If the Jets can get something closer to what Geno was in Seattle, this can really work out as a good bridge option for the Jets. However, that yellow arrow, half of it's pointing down, and a 73 rating that I place on Geno Smith and ranking the Jets 26th at quarterback, that's not emblematic of how Geno Smith played last year. I'm not an idiot. I have eyeballs, and it was horrible. Really bad interceptions, inaccurate throws, kind of thoughtless decision-making where it just felt like they were so down bad that he was just trying stuff, forcing balls into triple coverage, making those kind of YOLO plays out of structure that never really have a chance, and just digging the Raiders even deeper into a hole. And then some injuries creeped up for him as he was getting his ass kicked behind maybe the worst offensive line in the league last year, and you end up with just a disaster signing or trade signing acquisition and a horrible nightmare season, right? So try to brush that off. If you're Geno, the one thing you can say about Geno is he's been down bad before, right? He's got that famous "they ain't right back" quote. Well, he's going to have to do that again, right? And it's kind of a fun potential for a storybook ending for Geno Smith's career to bookend things where they began, where he was a bust for this Jets team. And this Jets team did not give him the patience and proper infrastructure to develop. And it is interesting to think back on what his career might look like differently if he did go somewhere else. Because we've seen some really good play from Geno Smith, man, and we've seen the arm talent. And, when in those 2 years in Seattle, he really, if you put together maybe the 20 best throws from those seasons, 2023, 2024, Geno would have had 3 or 4 of those. His arm talent is legit. He's still kind of sneakily mobile at his age in his mid-30s. He can really beat you with his legs. They can even lean into him in the design run game at times as a little bit of a change-up in the run game. And yes, he's an aggressive decision maker. Week to week, the accuracy can be inconsistent. Inconsistent is definitely something you're going to come back to Geno Smith on, even if things go well here, because that was the story in Seattle. Just you kind of held your breath every time he took the field for Seattle. You're like, well, he's probably going to play well, but what if he doesn't? And then he just shipwrecks the game. That's in there with Geno, but I do think this is a practical option for the Jets, especially in this offseason where there just weren't really solutions. They may have made a play for Kyler Murray. I would imagine he probably didn't want to come to the Jets. Beyond that, though, I feel like Geno was probably at the top of the list in terms of, plug and play options to maybe give you starting quarterback play this year when you don't have the number one pick in this draft class, right? Ultimately, I am pulling for Geno Smith. It is absolutely a season that I'm not going to head in and write off Geno Smith. I'm willing to acknowledge there's a lot of volatility with him and how bad he was last year, but that you can bounce back in the NFL and play better than that. Geno Smith himself has shown that. So tough player to rank. Again, the Jets come in 26 with him, and he's going to be probably the biggest wild card for this team's season. Probably not a hot take to say that. But let's talk a little bit about Cade Klubnik as a fourth-round pick. Likely projects as a career backup. Just not the biggest arm, not the biggest guy, not the best athlete. There was some bit of an it factor from him. Actually, I think the best of Cade Klubnik came making plays out of structure. It's kind of weird. Like, you don't really see him rip digs and deep shots from the pocket, but he makes some kind of batshit crazy throws off his back foot and in scramble drill. There's a little bit of Case Keenum with him. Case Keenum in his good year with the Vikings kind of had that where from the pocket he was kind of inconsistent, not the traiciest guy, a little take him or leave it in that sense, but could make some plays out of structure. I see a lot of that with Cade Klubnik. So if Geno gets hurt or he just has completely lost it and is throwing 3 picks every week, Klubnik as a fourth-round pick will be a cheap backup for 4 years and could help this team maybe navigate their way through one more transition season. If everything else that we're going to talk about in this video goes well, which is a lot of stuff, a lot of young players on this team, and if the coaching staff takes impresses us and takes a step forward from where I had them ranked, certainly, Cade Klubnik in the 4th round, again, could help this team. They're ultimately just looking for a bridge option to be serviceable through the year. Maybe Cade could surprise in that sense. I don't think it's going to be Brady Cook. Bailey Zappi, maybe he's had a couple good starts in his career. You're kind of looking at a 3-headed, not monster, worm, maybe 3-headed worm backup QB situation with Klubnik being my favorite choice there. But yes, there is your Jets quarterback room. Let's transition to the backfield, where the Jets didn't really make any changes this offseason. They're buying into this room and had a lot of other areas on the team to invest in. And honestly, the biggest thing here is they did lock up Breece Hall to a nice extension here, nice second contract running back there for the Jets. But they do get Braylon Allen back. I don't know that I'm going to fully call it an upgrade. Braylon Allen's pretty unproven, but I'm just going to say neutral in terms of what they're getting at running back. And as we dive into this backfield, it really centers around Breece Hall there, which is a good thing. It leaves the Jets in a good spot at running back. There's a lot of good backfields in the NFL, and the Jets are one of them. They get a B+ grade at running back, where they rank 14th for me in the NFL. And this really all centers around Breece Hall, who, when you really stack it up, is probably about the 13th or 14th best running back in the league. Maybe if there's a tiebreaker in there with the rankings, the Jets really don't have a lot of proven depth here. It can get swept under the rug that even a true workhorse back like a Breece Hall is only going to get 80% of the touches. You still want to see that 1 out of 5 carries be going to good use, and maybe these backs can really emerge as that, but they don't have the proven depth that some teams in the league do have. But yes, this is going to be a Breece Hall workhorse situation. They give him the big contract. He earned it last year in a really nice bounce back year. And we talked in the Jets deep dive last year, some of the comments about Breece Hall, how they were saying, it's a split committee. It was even as far as there's not even necessarily one guy we really want to lean into. Breece was heading into the contract year. There was no talks about extensions for him. He obviously had an incredible breakthrough into the NFL, but man, to be honest, in the 2 Aaron Rodgers years, especially the one that Rodgers played all year, dude, Breece Hall was quietly really bad in 2024. Didn't look explosive, was kind of a liability in the pass game. And that's what led you to the point, like heading into last year, you had a lot of questions about like, is he going to have a future with the Jets? They even shopped him around the trade deadline. But yeah, he had a really nice year. And like I said, I think about the 13th, 14th best running back in the NFL is about right for Breece Hall, who's got excellent vision. He's got excellent contact balance, a good blend of explosiveness and size. He doesn't really have breakaway speed. I do think he has lost a little bit of a step from that early career Breece Hall. On his best runs last year, he was getting caught from behind on most of them. And that's totally fine. It's just he doesn't really have that final gear that a lot of the top 5 to 8 backs in the league do have. So that is where he's going to fall down a little bit in the rankings. But, I can't sit here and talk about how breakaway speed is overrated a lot of times and then really slam Breece Hall for it. Yeah, when you're comparing him to the elite of the elite running backs in the league, it's worth noting. But on a down-to-down basis, Breece Hall is going to bring the full package to the table, and we saw that last year with this Jets team, and that's why he gets the extension. So he's a really great bell cow back, should be primed for another good year here with the Jets, just as he did last year, and I have no problem with the extension either. But yes, you do want to see, I think at this point, these backs really prove that they are quality backs, and they've both shown flashes. Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis there. Braylon Allen went down with an injury around week 4 last year, and that was a bummer because I do think in 2024, when Breece really struggled, Braylon Allen looked like he might be primed to take over this backfield, and it just took a complete U-turn, right? Allen gets hurt, and Breece gets back to form much more. But Allen has a little bit of, I don't want to say Derrick Henry, but maybe like Brandon Jacobs. Like he's just a big north and south athlete that is a handful for the defense. And he's a fun change-up type of back. We always talk about change of pace backs being these kind of shorter speedsters. Braylon Allen is like a unique guy to come off the bench, get 1 out of 5 carries, and be a little bit more of a physically imposing runner off the bench. So hopefully he can get healthy, and he really does have legitimate upside, still with a couple of cheap years of control here, to pair really nicely with Breece Hall and add some of that depth that you're really looking for here. Now, I know some Jets fans are going to be like, look, Isaiah Davis played really well last year, and I don't know. I think Isaiah Davis is a solid backup. No one sees Isaiah Davis come into the game and they're like, oh man, now we got to deal with this guy. Like he's got vision, he's got toughness, and he has done what the Jets have asked of him, and he's plugged in well as Breece has struggled and Braylon Allen has been injured. Like he's a nice kind of Swiss Army knife type of back. He is ideally a third back. I don't know that he's got more to be unlocked. I think you're definitely looking at Braylon Allen as a player with a lot more upside to be more of an impactful backup, but that's not to take anything away from Isaiah Davis. I think he's a very capable guy to have in your room. And then Kene Nwangwu is really just for kick returning, which we'll talk about with the special team segment, how awesome he is there, but he has never been able to lean into his traits to be a good running back. And then you got some undrafted types in Chip Trayanum and Sam Scott. But yeah, very good running back room. Really no questions with this group. It's just a matter of, can you see a Braylon Allen maybe take another leap forward and this be, a pretty challenging backfield to really handle for every snap of the game. But yeah, good room to start with here as we move beyond the quarterback room. But let's take a look at the pass catchers with these Jets, a very fun young group. And we start with their offseason changes. Not a ton of losses, nothing in the tight end room. And then at wide receiver, placeholder names, Tyler Johnson, Josh Reynolds. They're finally free from the Allen Lazard kind of Aaron Rodgers tax. Don't get me started on Allen Lazard, man. But Jets fans are happy he's gone. I think I said when they finally released him in like December or November, I was like, that's the best release of Allen Lazard's career. I'll stand by that. But yeah, he's gone. And then in terms of additions, you have to put Garrett Wilson up there. He only played about 6 games last year. That really hurt. After they got rid of Devontae Adams, they were really counting on being able to funnel their passing game through Garrett Wilson, and then he goes down. So they get him back. That's huge. And then they draft Omar Cooper Jr. in the first round. At tight end, they draft Kenyon Sadiq in the first round with 3 first-round picks after trading up. They really do invest in the weaponry here. Adonai Mitchell was acquired in the Sauce Gardner trade, so he played 36% of their snaps last year. So he's still in the mix here. And then they did sign Tim Patrick as well. But yeah, upgraded at both wide receiver and tight end, which shouldn't be a surprise given what they invested in the draft. But this is a very fun, logical group of playmakers, and I really love what the Jets did this offseason to get this group of pass catchers in a position to, yes, help this team succeed this year, but really grow together and set this team up for that big investment, hopefully in a quarterback in the 2027 draft, where you come in here and we'll show the offensive line in a little bit too. We've already hinted at that being a bright spot for this team, but now you look at these pass catchers and it's like, okay, you've got some youth. Like they got a lot to prove here from a ranking standpoint. They come in with a B- grade, 18th to 22nd. So certainly not at this team's potential yet with these guys with so much to prove. But man, I can work with this group, man. This is a ton of fun. So let's get into it. And you obviously start with Garrett Wilson, who's not unproven. He is awesome. And you could argue for the up arrow on Garrett Wilson. I don't know that it's necessarily going to come this year. I still think long-term upside for a guy that's still very young. Garrett Wilson, I do think, can be a legitimate number 1 wide receiver. I think I compared him to Stephon Diggs. Seems like every draft gets someone with a Stephon Diggs comp. But just kind of that smooth, athletic, great ball skills, great after the catch, but maybe a little bit thinner. That's usually where you get the Stephon Diggs comps, where he's not like physically imposing and maybe not necessarily truly the fastest guy in the field. But Garrett Wilson absolutely profiles like that, and we've seen obviously Stephon Diggs be a top 5 wide receiver and a true number 1. I do think in a best case scenario, eventually Garrett Wilson could be that. I'm not going to put the up arrow on him for this year just because we do have some questions about quarterback and play caller. And, I still think we're maybe a year away from really seeing Garrett Wilson, or even 2 years away from really seeing him reach his peak. But he does bring an incredible floor, and that floor is as someone that is a number 1 wide receiver, someone that can be the best wide receiver in your group. We've seen him operate as that. We've seen the Jets pay him as that. He just hasn't quite gone out and proved from a production standpoint that he can be that kind of like superstar Stephon Diggs level, in his prime type of wide receiver, even if I do think it is in there. But yeah, Garrett Wilson's freaking awesome. I really don't have a bad word to say about him. A great foundational piece for this group of weapons. And then you have these 3 highly invested young players, 2 rookies who are first-round picks, and then you have Mason Taylor, who was the 42nd pick a year ago. So 3 top 42 picks here around Garrett Wilson. All right, that's a lot to work with. And I actually list this team as more of a 12 personnel offense because of how flexible Kenyon Sadiq is as a player. He really is half wide receiver, half tight end. And I think a lot of people's minds went to the thought of Mason Taylor is just useless now. They replaced him with Kenyon Sadiq. That is not how I envision this going. In fact, Mason Taylor, I think, is still a big part of this, and him evolving into more of a full-sized Y tight end, I think, is the vision for this group of weapons, and really is important for Kenyon Sadiq to reach his upside so that you can use Kenyon Sadiq as a slot wide receiver, as a wing tight end, in all of the ways where he showed his best tape as a receiving threat, as a mismatch problem at Oregon. And this is actually the 3rd deep dive in a row where we have this sort of hybrid flex wide receiver tight end. The Brock Bowers, Harold Fannin role. Kenyon Sadiq's, the vision for him is going to be in that same exact conversation. It's not that every team has a unique piece like this. It just happened to be how these deep dives fell. But I wanted to make Sadiq the next kind of player that we highlight and talk about here with this group of weapons. Because I do think he's going to be a really good addition. I think he was a phenomenal draft pick. I think he's supremely talented, man. Oregon didn't always lean into him, but I think he showed he can make really tough catches. He's got that 4.4 speed, which it does just show up, especially when you use him in all these different formations and as a mismatch problem. It does show up, man. Like, he's got the speed to pull away after the catch. Him up the seam is really frustrating to deal with. So whether that's out of heavier packages and play action over the middle of the field, or just lining him up as a slot wide receiver and getting up the field, where he's this rare challenge for linebackers especially, but slot corners and safeties too, to hang with him over the intermediate part of the field and then to contest balls, where I think he showed the groundworks for some really good ball skills. It wasn't always consistent for him. That's going to be a big area for him. Is he a natural catcher of the football? But he definitely made some incredible catches and showed that it's in there. So big fan of that draft pick. And I think in terms of, like, if you're scheming things up well, and that's a big if with Frank Reich, if you're able to scheme things up well, he's an awesome easy button receiver for Geno Smith in the sense of creating easy open looks on first reads. And even if he's not wide open, put the ball in his area and give the guy a chance. So I am expecting a good rookie season. I don't think this is going to be a prolific passing game. Spoiler alert there. And there are some other mouths to feed. So if you're talking fantasy football, like, I like him. I'm willing to draft him. I'm not like going overboard to get him or anything like that. But I have ended up with Sadiq in a couple of my dynasty drafts. So I'm excited to see where things go with him. And I love that pick. And then, I am going to go to Omar Cooper Jr. next, who is the number 2 wide receiver here, depending how you want to define Sadiq's role. But dude, this was probably my biggest guy in the 2026 NFL draft. I was very early on him in like January, saying, hold on, this number 3 catching passes from Fernando Mendoza, that's a first-round wide receiver and a true do-it-all guy that I don't really understand what he doesn't do well. Does he do anything at an elite level? Probably not. Like, he's got good size. He's got good speed. I would say the best trait he has is run after catch. I don't know that he's going to be an elite run after catch player. I don't know that he's going to be prime Deebo Samuel. But I think he's going to be very, very good at it. I think his ball skills are very, very good. Probably not the best catch radius or the most incredible hands or anything, but he did make some unbelievable catches at Indiana. I think his route running, it has a very good baseline. A lot of his usage at Indiana was from the slot and didn't give him the full breadth to like beat press on the outside and all that. So there's still some to be proven in terms of separation and route running and stuff. But dude, I compared him to DJ Moore. I think he can be that type of player. DJ Moore was a late first round pick. Omar Cooper, a late first round pick. I'm going to stand by that comp. And if Omar Cooper is as good as a prime DJ Moore next to what Garrett Wilson and Kenyon Sadiq could be, I mean, not only is that just an incredible collection of talents, but we talk about complementary skill sets. I mean, these guys all bring a little bit of something different to the table and can line up all over the place. Like, that's incredible, man. I love everything about what they invested in this room. And it's actually going to be really impressive if the Jets do what the Jets do and find a way to make this group not work out. Especially when you now talk about Mason Taylor really falling into a reasonable role for him. Like, was he always going to be like the highest upside, most incredible tight end that could emerge as like long-term the number 2 player in your passing game, which is what he kind of had to be last year? No, probably not. Like, maybe, but probably not. But he's a good athlete. He's physical. He's the son of Jason Taylor. He has started to bulk up after he was thinner at LSU coming out. He's incrementally added a few pounds here, a few pounds there. And I always thought his effort was pretty good as a blocker. He just needed more refinement there. And he just turned 22 years old. Like so many of these tight ends come out at 23, 24 years old. He is ahead of the curve in that sense. And now they are going to ask him to be the Y tight end. He's going to have to prove from a blocking sense he can handle it. I don't think he was a disaster as a blocker in his rookie season. You just need to keep seeing those developmental boxes get checked. And then, yeah, like he's still a good athlete. He's still enough to be a mismatch on linebackers, especially when you're worried about all these other guys. But think about, can he be what Ferguson is for the Cowboys, what Dalton Schultz has been. Those are really good projections for someone that can just be a really quality, eventually like a $10 million a year possession tight end that's going to work underneath, be reliable, give you some stuff after the catch, and block. Like, that's everything that Mason Taylor really had a nice projection for. It's kind of the lack of dynamism and like consistency with the hands and like someone that you probably never want to like make the focal point of your passing game. That was always maybe a little shakier with him, but I love how he falls in line. This is just brilliant roster construction. And that's all why like I wanted to focus on those four. Those will be the four prominent weapons here, even if we typically list your starting three wide receivers. Because Kenyon Sadiq is the player he is, the Jets are probably going to be in the top 5 in terms of running 12 personnel, but the beauty of that is that their 12 personnel is really 11 and a half personnel. And it does all the things we've talked about in the Browns and Raiders deep dives, where when you come out with this is your starting 5, with Breece Hall obviously as the running back, you force defenses to make a decision. Do we come out and try to defend this in base, in which case Kenyon Sadiq can easily be matched up on a linebacker? Or do we match this in nickel where they're going to be able to outsize us and beat us up with, a couple of hopefully really good blocking tight ends in those roles? Sadiq is not the biggest guy to dig out defensive ends, but there's a lot to be said about how great he was as a move blocker for Oregon, as a lead blocker from the wing, dealing with slot corners in the screen game. Like, man, flipping a bubble screen to Omar Cooper Jr. with Kenyon Sadiq blocking for him on the wing, that works for me. And hopefully Frank Reich leans into that type of stuff, which those bubble screens being an extension of their run game is a big part of a Frank Reich scheme, theoretically speaking. So those are the expectations with those four. Then you do still have some interesting depth. Adonai Mitchell didn't make the graphic there, but he's a quasi-starter. He's going to be, when they do run 11, like true 11 personnel, he's going to be the other guy here. I will say, like, he fits really nicely in the sense that if you have a missing skill set between Garrett Wilson, Omar Cooper, and Kenyon Sadiq, it would be like that take the top off the field, like design vertical shot guy. I would say Adonai Mitchell can do that. I mean, he's got legit speed. He's a freak. When he's on, he's shown some really good stuff, but he's had some of the most ugly games, whether it's drops or like boneheaded mistakes. I want to say he had one of those classic, like, dropped the ball before he crossed the goal line plays for the Colts. That's been Adonai Mitchell in college. At the NFL level, is from a week-to-week basis, who the hell are you getting in Adonai Mitchell? And this comes back to a conversation I had about him, I think in the Colts deep dive in Adonai Mitchell's rookie season. Part of the reason he ended up going in the second round is there was a lot of conversation about he has diabetes, and the reports were he struggled to manage that. And when, and I'm not a doctor, so I'll probably screw up this explanation, but essentially when your blood sugars are inconsistent, you aren't taking the time to manage that, and they get all out of whack, it can almost be like a multiple personality disorder where you're getting a different guy just because of his condition. Now, that's all speculation. I haven't heard much talk about it, but it does match what we've seen from him in his career, is just like, what are we getting on a week-to-week basis? Like, look, I can't confirm that he's inconsistent because of his diabetes, but it does kind of add up, right? Especially when you heard those reports coming out of Texas. So I don't know. I do just find it fascinating that those two are connected. But I'm not necessarily betting on Adonai Mitchell, but he definitely, like, if you talk about like realistic kind of projections, maybe not a best case scenario, but reasonable good outcomes, Adonai Mitchell to just be a designed big play threat as the fifth piece in this, with still 2 more years of cheap control, yeah, absolutely, man. Plug him in there. And then you do have Tim Patrick, who I imagine will get out there just to give Garrett Wilson a breather and do some of the dirty work, especially as a run blocker. Like, I bet that's primarily why they brought him in there. But, he's an aging, big-bodied wide receiver, but he's a good fit as depth like that. And then you have, honestly, probably a competition between Arian Smith and Isaiah Williams. Arian Smith was a 4th-round pick who I don't think is guaranteed to make this team after being overdrafted to begin with, especially as Isaiah Williams really broke out as this team's prominent punt returner last year and did some stuff from the slot, showing he can be some depth for this team as they had all those injuries. So I would be a little bit surprised if they keep all 7 of them. Maybe they do. Worth noting, though, that Arian Smith can get open deep, and if you have more of a healthy passing game infrastructure to get that guy down the field, maybe every 3 weeks, you're taking that design deep shot and trying to scheme that guy open. He was one of the better separators in his draft class. He just had kind of like, dare I say, generationally bad hands. I don't think that's crazy to say with Arian Smith. So kind of like a smaller version of MVS, I guess. But I don't know that having him and Adonai Mitchell really makes sense. And like Mitchell was obviously brought in mid-season last year, so may have been to kind of override the Arian Smith role in that sense. But you also have Jeremy Ruckert, who did get a contract extension here. He's good insurance if Mason Taylor actually doesn't take another step forward as a blocker. Ruckert is in that wide tight end mold. He will allow them to get to 13 personnel for sure. Like, you've got legitimate depth there. And then, dude, Jelani Woods, if he's healthy, and I believe he was with Frank Reich when he had his, like, one good year. I could be off on that. But Reich would have certainly drafted him in Indianapolis. But Woods is a fun player. Great Madden tight end, because the injury stuff rarely comes up in Madden. Unfortunately, this is real life, and Jelani Woods is made of glass, sadly, but true freak athlete that's shown some good stuff. So you have a deep tight end room, and if Woods is your 4th tight end and you give him 5 snaps a game and just hope he can hold up, sure. They also do roster a fullback in Andrew Beck. Now, we could talk briefly about Breece Hall in the receiving game. The other backs I don't think really add too much here, but Breece Hall has been up and down as a receiving threat. I know when he's focused and he's not dropping the ball and he's taking his pass blocking duties seriously, he is a very good receiving 3rd down back, but there's been a lot of moments of frustration with him, of like just dropping checkdowns that if he just catches the ball would certainly be 1st downs, and blown pass protections and stuff. So he's talented, making guys miss, and has fluid hands when he does catch the ball, but maybe a little bit inconsistent, which is what leads him to that B grade. But he has produced in that kind of true check down type of role before. So really fun group of weapons. So much upside for this group. If everything goes great here and Geno's balling out and all these guys are just like best case scenario, they hit their ceilings, this could someday be one of the best groups of weapons in the entire National Football League. Is it realistic that all comes together this year? Probably not, but after next year, or maybe after a second season of a rookie quarterback by the end of the 2028 season, they got this thing set up, man. And I don't think we're going to come out of this year and say they need to add more, like maybe some wide receiver depth. But I really like this group, and certainly that's a goal for this team, is like, look, we got our core from a pass catching standpoint, and I believe that they do. So that's a ton of fun with this Jets team. It really is. And then you go to the offensive line, and you can kind of see by their offseason changes, like, they believe in this group. They were one of the only offensive lines in the league last year that actually stayed healthy. And I make that point in a lot of these deep dives when we talk about depth and injury-prone players. It's like, dude, 1 to maybe 3 offensive lines get through a year healthy. And the Jets were like the one that did last year. And they're largely counting on those guys again this year. They are swapping one starter, getting a little bit younger at left guard. John Simpson, who was probably their weak link last year, is gone. He goes back to Baltimore, but he played 97% of snaps last year, as we detailed. And they bring in Dylan Parham, who, as we'll see in a second here, kind of very similar level patch at left guard. And then they did draft Anez Cooper out of Miami in the 6th round. But on the offensive line, I actually said neutral, which certainly by Jets standards, you'll take that to just run this thing back for the most part. Again, swapping out at left guard there. But there's further upside here. Like, there are still some young players. Again, a lot of investments on the O-line. You're looking at a pair of 1st-round picks over the last several years at both tackle bookend spots. And then Joe Tippmann as well was a high second round pick. Those are your core building blocks around some more free agent Band-Aid types. And we'll obviously break this whole unit down, but just to start the conversation with where I have the O-line ranked, they come in 14th for overall offensive line, so an above average unit. Inside a large cluster, I didn't even realize we had such a large cluster in the middle of the league with just kind of like above average pass blocking units. But that's where the Jets are, which actually ranks 9th to 18th. And then in run blocking, they are smack dab in the middle of the league, 15th to 16th. So it's a very balanced unit without really a weak link. But I would also say that currently they don't have a bona fide superstar dominant player yet. These young tackles, though, that we can get right into, they have a chance to take that step, both of them. And Armin Membu being the fresh new toy from last year's draft is going to be the natural starting point. I usually work left to right, and I'm going to do that. And I'm also kind of doing that to make a statement that even if Membu is the fun new toy and Olu's been here for 2 years, I don't want to dismiss the fact that Olu Fashanu is amazing and has been a brilliant draft pick for this Jets team and just might end up the better of these two tackles. They're different. But Olu, I would say, now that we have 2 years of tape on him, this has been pretty much everything you projected as a well-respected prospect. And in terms of what his strengths and weaknesses were coming out, I would say he has now shown to very much match that prospect profile where he is well on, like, for example, he had a Laramie Tunsil pro comp in the sense of like, he's got all the physical traits, but he is like a little bit more comfortable in pass protection, and his athleticism moving backwards kind of shows more as a pass blocker. Whereas a run blocker is a little bit more inconsistent and maybe never going to be an elite run blocker. And I would say at this point, that's what we've seen from Olu. There were some moments in his rookie season where I was like, man, he's really getting after it in the run game. I think last year we didn't see that quite as much, but still some moments. And again, I'm not saying he's a bad run blocker, but certainly you think of the pass pro with someone like him and the Laramie Tunsil comp. That's been the case with Olu. He's been really a good pass protecting left tackle that I don't think is done getting better. I really don't. He's got this massive lower half. He absorbs power, which is so important if you want to be that cornerstone pass blocking tackle. But despite having those giant shock absorber tree trunks, he can move when he's moving backwards. He can get the depth he needs. He can cut off inside counters. He's still getting better and better with his hands, but it's all good enough. And he's got the length. Like, everything checks out for him. And while it's a best case scenario, I still think to this day a best case scenario of being a Laramie Tunsil type of player where he could someday become and prove to be one of the best pass blockers in the entire NFL, and then still a very good run blocker that those traits can show up moving forward. So that's where you're at with Olu. And then I will slide over to the other side with the right tackle in Armin Membu, who's a little bit different. Like, both these guys were excellent first-round draft prospects with really the sky's the limit type of upside. And I'm obviously very high on this duo. I think Membu is kind of the opposite, where I think he's a little bit more comfortable and coordinated and gets after it a little bit more in the run game. Whereas as far as staying coordinated, landing his strikes, pairing his hands with his legs, being more consistent in terms of pass blocking technique, it's still getting there. Membu is younger, and I would say just from an athletic evaluation, probably does have the better upside than Olu Fashanu, and I'm not saying he's a bad pass blocker. Like, he was largely good and definitely got better as the year went on. There were some moments, though, where, kind of like I said, the feet could stop moving. He could let his chest get exposed to power at times, cutting off inside counters. Just some more of those glitches with him where you saw a few more losses from him compared to Olu. But, dude, this duo is incredible as a building block, especially when we already talked about what we did with those wide receivers. Like, look, we can make fun of the Jets, and I certainly have done in this video and will continue to do until they become, until they actually reach their upside, which we've been waiting for the Jets to do that for years. But if you evaluate the process and finding the right players and upside, this is how you're supposed to do it. With a group of weapons like that and a cornerstone tackle duo like this, yes, like hell yes, absolutely. I love everything about that. And then when you have a cornerstone duo like that you're hoping is just going to continue to get better as they've shown they can do, you don't need to be elite on the inside. You just don't want to have a weak link, and that's where the Jets are at. They flip out left guard with Dylan Parham, who I don't have a ton of notes on. Like, he's not the biggest guy. His physical dominance has held his consistency back, maybe a little bit more of a matchup-dependent type of guard, where his play strength can hold him back at times, but he's reasonable and has been reasonable, and he should settle in just fine as probably a weakest link, or him and Josh Myers are kind of both your weakest links, and they're both just okay. Josh Myers is a pretty solid pass blocker. He's going to be working on double teams a lot as a center. He can lose one-on-one, certainly, but that's where he's better, and certainly not going to be a turnstile there. His run blocking is quite underwhelming. I would say he's one of the worst run blocking centers in the league. I mean, you talk about a lack of coordination and play strength and just ability to stick on blocks and drive dudes. Myers has been extremely frustrating in that regard. And that was no different with the Jets, but he's started a lot of games and knows what he's doing. So again, just kind of like floor raising left guard and center there. And then you have Tip Raymond, who, I mean, he is somewhere in between where we talked about those two interior guys and what we talked about with the tackles. Like, Tip Raymond is a traitsy, highly invested guy that is continuing to get better. And it's very impressive that he has had the center guard flexibility that he's had. And he still might someday end up as a center. Right now, it just makes sense with Josh Myers, who doesn't have that guard flexibility. But Raymond really gets after it. He's an awesome athlete. The pass blocking, I would say, when left one-on-one, is still getting there. He has had some games, certainly, that are better than others. But he as well has really good upside. So if Fashanu and Membu hit their ceilings and Tippmann continues to get a little bit better, a slightly better Joe Tippmann as your third best offensive lineman, that plays. And then you just raise the floor with those other two guys. Like, we just need a little bit more development really from these young guys. And we are talking about a top 10 offensive line in the league. They're obviously very close. They're even just inside that cusp from a pass blocking standpoint, where they are in that 9th to 18th range. So that's a really good starting five. I will say this, you're praying for the same injury luck again, which is honestly a little bit unlikely. I don't love the depth here for the Jets, especially on the interior. Tackle, you could probably survive a little bit more. You have Chukwuma Okorafor, who has bounced around at this point. He started a lot of games in the league, but feels like he's struggled to stay healthy himself and has certainly regressed in terms of his efficiency. Getting a little bit older as well, but gets another job here as a swing tackle. He's a reasonable swing tackle addition. I don't hate that. Max Mitchell maybe is more of a guard depth piece for you. He's really struggled to protect the quarterback when he's been out there, and his play strength is a concern. He is athletic and can get after it in the run game. He's adequate as far as NFL depth goes, but he's not someone you trust. Landon Young is kind of bounced around. He hasn't really settled in any sort of consistent shape or form. But then, you've got even more questions with your interior depth. I mean, Xavier Newman has had to play here, and that's been largely ugly, especially from a pass protection standpoint. He's been okay moving guys in the run game. And then you spend that day 3 pick on Anez Cooper. I think he can be adequate depth as well. I actually don't really see him as much of a developmental upside type of guy. He's incredibly unathletic. Maybe a best case scenario is actually something closer to what John Simpson was for them. Just a mauler with just vice grip hands. He wasn't a bad player at Miami, but he did ultimately get drafted around where I envisioned him going. Maybe he surprises. Again, not like it was a bad pick, but not someone you're necessarily confident in if he has to step in. And then Marquise Hayes, as far as interior O-line prospects go, was a little bit of a bigger name in the draft, but he actually hasn't seen the field yet since he came out. I think it was out of Oklahoma. So I would say you're really looking at probably average to maybe even below average depth, and there's a decent chance that you got to go to some of these guys throughout the course of the season. You end up with a little bit more of a weak link in there than certainly what they had last year, where they had essentially perfect health. Ideally, you would have a little bit more of an insurance piece to plug in, but a lot of teams can't afford that luxury. Most teams can't. So it's not like it's anything against the Jets, but it's worth at least mentioning the health that they did have and the relative lack of depth that they have here. Ultimately, though, it is a positive conversation on this offensive line, just as it was with these weapons. Does it all come together this year? Is this a prolific offense this year? Look, it's not hard to explain. These are really fun draft picks and a lot of young players that are heading in the right direction. Sometimes it does just take time. And in this series, we do rank these teams and these players closer to their floor, not, ranking guys at their upside projection, ranking them at what they've proven right now. And with all of this exciting young talent comes with it a lot to prove. So ranking this offense as is comes in pretty low. And of course, the coaching and Geno Smith with their lower rankings doesn't help here either. In fact, that's the biggest reason this comes in lower. But the Jets came out not as the worst offense in the league, but as my 29th offense starting the season here. 28th in passing game, 27th in run game. Maybe not standing out necessarily in either category, but a very fun, workable baseline that maybe if things go well here for the Jets, in sort of a reasonable positive outlook, maybe this ends up the 22nd best offense. And even if some of these young players are a little bit more week to week or a little bit more inconsistent, you can see it, right? You can see the progress and you feel really good about dropping a quarterback into this thing, just kind of dropping lighter fluid on the whole thing. That's the dream, and they've set themselves up really well for that, even if we're maybe in the earlier chapters of that plan. And then maybe there is that 5% dream outcome where Geno is awesome, maybe even has a career year, that Frank Reich did actually get in the lab and he's ready to throw his name back into, what was once a respected head coach. If those two pieces come together and then your guys are young and exciting and you've got a good infrastructure here with really everything else, okay, there's some really fun upside there. Again, probably more long-term projection. In an unreasonable best case scenario, though, this could be a pretty freaking good offense. And I am ultimately just excited to see where things land with this side of the ball. As I am with the defense, man, let's flip over to that side of things here. And I know I kind of shit-talked Aaron Glenn, and there is a part of me that just doesn't think he's the right guy. But I do think the Jets had an awesome offseason. We'll go through every position group here. They made a lot of big additions to all three pockets of this defense, not just improving the offense. And I am giving Aaron Glenn a chance to turn things around here, even if I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. But let's begin with this defensive line, a much improved defensive line. As we look at their offseason changes, they are saying goodbye to some of their more household names, especially Quinnen Williams, who was traded away near the deadline last year. He has to be noted there because he did play 32% of their snaps last year. And I don't think it's a huge coincidence that once he was shipped off, their run defense did take a dive. So they did still play about half their season with Quinnen out there, but they did make some additions to more than make up for it, in my opinion. Tavondre Sweat was acquired. You can actually package that with the loss of Jermaine Johnson there in the edge room. That was I think a 1-for-1 trade, which, look, can't say I just hate the Jets all the time. I think that was a steal, man. I think Tavondre Sweat's value is probably close to double what Jermaine Johnson's is, and maybe he has a big bounce back year for the Titans, but Sweat is cheaper with another rookie year deal, and I think just a much better player, and honestly a unique nose tackle position that's much harder to find than kind of a solid edge player, which Jermaine Johnson was. So I love that trade for the Jets. One of my favorite offseason moves they made, on top of a lot of really good offseason moves from this front office. David Onyemata can still play. He's reunited with Aaron Glenn after kind of starting his career with him in New Orleans. 4th-round pick, Darrell Jackson, really nice value. I was a big fan of Darrell Jackson, so I love the additions that they made. And again, it's not like Quinnen was there for the second half of the year anyway, so I do say upgraded on the interior of the D-line, and then upgraded at edge as well. Yes, they ship off Jermaine Johnson, but I think they more than replace those shoes, not just spending the number 2 pick on David Bailey, a pick that I was lower on, but still a big addition from a first-round caliber prospect, even if I think it was very, very rich for the number 2 pick in the draft. We'll talk about that, but also really nice free agent additions. Joseph Asai, who kind of broke through last year with the Bengals, and Kingsley Enagbari. Really like how they fit as a part of this edge rotation. And the only other loss there is Michael Clemens, who had become kind of the, the GOAT or the clown face, not the greatest of all time, but some of the Jets fans I know were pointing at Michael Clemens a lot, like, I can't wait till he's gone type. He actually got a decent contract from the Colts. He's had better years before, but was bad last year, so really not much of a loss there. I think upgraded both on the interior and the edge. But let's delve into this defensive line. And it is a delve. One of the deepest D-lines in the league. And I could honestly make 2 starting lineups of graphics here. And I love you guys, but I'm not going to do that. We're going to go with 1 D-line graphic here. But I do want you to use your imagination and understand that you have really 8 starters on this defensive line that if they're all able to stay healthy, which that's another thing, like just having that depth protects you from injuries, which are almost guaranteed to happen. But given health, I think these 8 starters that we'll break down here will all be pretty close in terms of snap counts. And that's awesome. And all these guys play different roles. And for all of my questions about Aaron Glenn, I think I talked about this a little bit earlier. I will give him a ton of credit. I do think he really understands how to craft his fronts, how to be multiple, varying 3-4, 4-3, odd front versus even front. We've really seen everything from Aaron Glenn. And I trust him. I know, those words came out of my mouth. I trust Aaron Glenn to properly utilize this group, and I think it's going to be a ton of fun to watch because you do have pretty much every individual skill set you could want on a D-line. And even if you don't have that number 1 superstar that we talk about for so many D-lines, if you are able to kind of, like, that was what Bill Belichick did so well. Now, I'm not calling Aaron Glenn Bill Belichick, but if you can rotate these guys, play these players situationally, put them in the right gaps, give them the right assignments and tasks for what they're good at, that's kind of like the Moneyball approach. We can create an elite D-line in the aggregate. And this could be maybe not the best D-line in the league, but a really good unit. And before I break down all these players, I might as well mention what their ranking is off the bat here. In a very good starting point here, ranking 19th, 24th for overall D-line. I think the pass rush especially is what drags that down a little bit from what was a pretty optimistic intro there. Still some unproven commodities that are going to have to really showcase what they can do here from a pass rushing perspective. But certainly the D-line run defense on the fringe of top 10 there, 10th to 14th from that perspective. And for those looking at the graphic, I know we have some audio listeners via the Fully Inflated Football Pod, so shout out to you guys. But we've got 4 up arrows on the screen, so certainly some of that potential to bring these rankings up as we'll discuss. But boy, where do we start? I guess we start with the guys I actually put up on the graphic, which is probably closer to your pass rushing package, especially when you talk about the edge rushers. And I think you have a pretty clear-cut image in terms of how to utilize these edge rushers because Will McDonald and David Bailey are true pass rush. I don't want to call like designated pass rushers necessarily, but certainly much better pass rushers than run defenders. Will McDonald at his size and what he's proven in the league so far absolutely falls in that bucket. David Bailey with how he profiles, much more inconsistent, bad pad level, bad anchor against the run at Texas Tech. Definitely a speed rusher and profiles as an impactful sack artist. But then you have Joseph Asai and Kingsley Enagbari, who were legitimate investments in free agency to eat up the dirty work. And both of these guys have shown to be very good run defenders, especially Kingsley Enagbari has been kind of an early down run defense oriented guy with a lot of size, length, and strength. It was a big loss for Green Bay as that number 3 edge to do a lot of that dirty work. So that conversation kind of begins and stops right there. You know what you're getting in Enagbari, and he was a really good addition, especially when your 2 best edge rushers are more pass rush guys that you don't want to see on the field a whole lot. And then Joseph Asai is kind of in the middle there. Asai can play some third downs. He showed some good pass rushing stuff for the Bengals last year, but certainly has the traits and tenacity and strength to play the run. So I think we see more Asai on earlier downs, allowing McDonald and Bailey to stay fresh. I don't know that we need to spend too much more time on Asai and Enagbari. I think their role here is pretty easy to project and is definitely a reflection of the run defense grade for this D-line, as we talked about, coming in pretty favorable. But I do want to individually spend a little bit more time on Will McDonald and David Bailey. And let's start with that David Bailey convo, who was the number 2 pick in the draft. And I'm on the record, I'll stand by it. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Overdraft, in my opinion. David Bailey finished as the 19th player in this draft class for me. They draft him number 2 overall. That doesn't mean I hate David Bailey. It doesn't mean I think he can't make an impact for this defense. And if leveraged correctly, as we described, that doesn't mean they can't turn him into a really useful, good player here. I just think there were blue chip talents and better long-term projections and even better players at the position they drafted. Ruben Bain, I think Arvell Reese has much more of a long-term projection as a hopeful superstar at this position. I see David Bailey as much more of a one-dimensional player in the sense that he's much more of a later down pass rush. I don't want to say pass rush only, but pass rush oriented player because he's got this kind of like lighter lower half. His pad level was questionable. The run defense was just not good unless he was really penetrating and using his athleticism and making plays in the backfield, which he can do occasionally. Teams are going to be able to run at him and have success in a way that I don't think teams are going to be able to do against guys like Ruben Bain and Arvell Reese in this draft class. But I actually think as a pass rusher, he's currently pretty damn one-dimensional too. He was a good enough pass rusher for him to still be a top 20 player in this draft, for me to look at his incredible get-off, the speed he has, decent power, and the occasional inside spin move that kind of makes your jaw drop. I think he's inconsistent in terms of pass rush plan and understanding how to set up those inside counters. That's where you're really hoping he can come along, and if he really develops as a artist at the pass rush position, not just counting on speed and get off as he largely did at Texas Tech, then he can really be in business. But that's the same conversation you have with like Arvell Reese. It's like, you really got to develop the skill set to get there. And then Ruben Bain's just like already there. And how many uber athletic pass rushers do we say if they develop the pass rushing skill set and it just doesn't happen? It's not impossible for David Bailey. But again, I think he's good enough. He's got a very high floor rush rating for me, already a 76 rating, which is adequate starting level as a rookie with the up arrow on him to say he can prove to be even better than that. But I do think that he's going to learn that you can't just run upfield and get sacks in the NFL when about 80% of his charted sacks was just that. Yes, he's fast. He's got great get-off. But the tackles he got these sacks against and the quarterbacks not stepping up in the pocket, that's gonna be effectively eliminated against the NFL unless you're dealing with backup tackles and backup quarterbacks. Like he might get a backup tackle or a quarterback that just keeps dropping back in the pocket and doesn't understand that he needs to step up. And David Bailey could have a 4-sack game in those instances because his speed and get-off is such a trump card. But he's not bendy. Again, the inside counters, he gets caught up on blocks because he doesn't have that developed pass rushing skill set. I think his power is just okay. Once you take away that just pure speed rush, I think you're talking, players in the realm of Leonard Floyd, Vic Beasley. My pro comp on David Bailey was Bruce Irvin. all guys that when leveraged appropriately had high sack seasons and could still be impacts. But are those guys worthy of the number 2 pick in the draft? Were they worthy of the first round picks that teams spent on them? No. And there's kind of a spectrum there with David Bailey. And I think he was a little bit more of a risky prospect than often got discussed with him. So it's a sensitive conversation. No fan wants to hear someone like me say I didn't love the draft pick. I absolutely would have gone in a different direction. I think there's a pretty thin thread that needs to be found for David Bailey to be worth that type of pick. I think if you were more mid-teens, you could drop him in here and be like, yeah, he's going to be able to get after the quarterback and might be able to, impact the passing game sooner rather than later. But the expectations, the standards do just change with that being where you took the guy. So that's my David Bailey opinion. The beauty is draft is behind us. The opinions have been laid, and now we get to watch what David Bailey can do. And like I said, I still think you bring something to the table to your pass rush. And then you have Will McDonald, who went with the 13th pick in the draft or whatever it was, 14. And it's been kind of a similar conversation of like, okay, he can get after the quarterback. Isn't necessarily dominant, but he's very good at it. I think he finished like 23rd in pass rush win rate. And I think in terms of a pure pass rusher, it's probably about where Will McDonald is. If it's third down, you get to line him up in true pass sets and just let him tee off where he has that incredible twitch. I do think Will McDonald is more refined in terms of counter moves and versatility as a rusher. He's not as dependent on that speed, and he's a much more bendy player than David Bailey. But definitely the speed and the bend has played for Will McDonald. And I'll say this, between McDonald and Bailey, you better practice your technique against spin moves if you're a tackle facing the Jets any given week, because you're essentially guaranteed to see some. Will McDonald's spin move is one of the best in the league, and a lot of his best plays come on that. And you see the combination of athletic twitch and how he sets up those outside moves and can get into those, really making an impact. So in a sense, that's a really good mentor for David Bailey to teach him kind of when to go to that spin move. McDonald, like I talked about with Bailey, has decent power, but nothing overwhelming. He's a very good pass rusher that has kind of had to come off the field on rundowns because he's played at under 240 pounds, and he just can't hang in that sense. But that is why it's really nice that you have Asai and Enigbari there to keep these pass rushers fresh, limit their liabilities as run defenders, and they're much more equipped now with more players and diversity of skill sets to be able to lean into that. And I'm happy for Aaron Glenn that he at least has that proper rotation that I know he wants. And then it's almost irrelevant to talk about the guys after that. Braden McGregor had to play last year, unfortunately, for Jets fans. I don't know that he makes the team again. He was pretty bad. Tyler Barron was a day 3 draft pick with some twitch and pass rush upside, but not going to get a whole lot of opportunities here. Maybe more of a practice squad developmental piece there for Barron. But then we kind of inhale, catch our breath, because it's another long conversation with the interior D-line with some really fun pieces. Some of these are more veteran, what you see is what you get types, Harrison Phillips and the addition of David Onyemata, but still good players. David Onyemata is a 3-down defensive tackle. Very good run defender, very good pass rusher. He's a guy that I put a lot of pro comps on because I think he is an archetype in terms of balanced size, very good athlete. He's like the definition of a DT2 in an ideal situation where he does a little bit of everything, set it and forget it, can kind of play him everywhere, maybe not ideally as a nose tackle, but just a really good player that, yes, is 32 years old, but he's been fighting back on regression. He had a very good year last year for Atlanta. Very surprised Atlanta just let him go when we get to their interior D-line for their deep dive. And the Jets are to benefit. Bringing him in here, very nice addition. I think I'll gloss over Harrison Phillips a little bit quicker too, like very good player, another sneaky good addition. They stole him from the Vikings. I was very surprised the Vikings basically treated him as a cap casualty. And he came in here and was a really good run defender that had some really good moments for the Jets. He's very limited as an athlete and ideally won't be out there for pass rush downs, but He can play 3-tech. He can play the nose. He's a great piece to have. Absolutely. And then really the interior D lineman that you could have started with and can get the most excited about is the acquisition of T'Vondre Sweat. There's been some questions about, keeping his body in shape. He's had some injuries as, you see some of these freak athlete, like oversized players can deal with injuries more often. It wasn't enough that I put the like red cross, calling him an injury prone player. I don't think it's quite to that degree, but he had the DUI before the draft. There's been some stuff, and Tennessee, I think, was willing to take less for him. He wasn't a great scheme fit with Robert Saleh's defense, but I think they were willing to take less for him because they don't really see him as a culture fit, and there's just some of that going on with him. But I'll say this, man, despite all that noise, it didn't impact him in his final year at Texas, where he really broke out, I think as a fifth-year player there. And it has not impacted him when he's played for the Titans. He's been a hit for the Titans as one of the better true three-down nose tackles in the league. Every team, it feels like, is dreaming of a scenario where they can get anything close to what Dexter Lawrence has been able to do for the Giants, where you have a legitimate 350-pound nose tackle that can dominate the run game and open things up for everybody else, be that two-gapping nose tackle. But if you're in those in-between downs, 2nd and 7, 3rd and 4, he can be out there. And if the team wants to run on you, you have that run defense presence. But if they get into the drop back game, to have that player also be a factor as a rusher. Now, Dexter Lawrence is amazing at it, but just someone that can actually push the pocket and show a little bit of twitch to get off blocks and contain quarterbacks and run guys down. Like Sweat has shown some workability as a rusher in all those different areas. Still room to get better, and has looked great defending the run in his first 2 years. He's a really awesome chess piece and a really good player. Again, I love this trade for the Jets. There's just not really many guys that can do what Sweat offers to your defense from an X's and O's advantage, like math change. He's a math changer, even if he's not a superstar. Really a nice piece when you have all these other guys to kind of craft ideal fronts. And yeah, when you want to run an odd front, you have your true nose tackle there that can eat stuff up. So love that addition. And I love that I think Aaron Glenn is the type of guy that can keep this guy focused and in shape and get the best out of him. Because that is the redeeming quality of Aaron Glenn, is he relates to players. He drives that kind of football character and toughness. And honestly, like, that's a big task for Aaron Glenn to maximize T'Vondre Sweat from a schematics and just head coach, personality, leadership standpoint. If Aaron Glenn can't get the most out of a T'Vondre Sweat, what is it that he's really here to do? And that is an area where I actually will back Aaron Glenn and say this could work out. So I love that. And then you also have, Jawan Briggs. Most of you, I'm sure Jets fans do, but most of you neutral bystanders probably don't know who Jawan Briggs is, unless you watch my Studs and Duds series. Shout out to my YouTube members and my patrons who follow Studs and Duds this year, as it made its change to exclusive content. But Jawan Briggs, while this Jets team was busy playing noon games and losing everybody's attention and losing their football games, Jawan Briggs, who they acquired from the Cleveland Browns before the season, had a total breakthrough in his second year as a really nice, promising young player. And if you didn't have Onyemata and Sweat here, we'd be talking about Briggs having an opportunity to really emerge as a core building block for this team. Now, he's got to go out and prove it again, as he was a 7th-round pick that the Browns gave up on. And, there wasn't a whole lot of this in college of him wrecking pass protections like he did for the Jets last year, because it really was as a pass rusher where he shined through. But the tape doesn't lie on him. He's got power, he's got twitch and the ability to run stunts and be that athlete, but he can be a penetrator. win with a rip move and quickness in that sense, and he can drive guys backwards. There's a lot of a young David Onyemata in Jawan Briggs' game, and I think that's a really great mentor there. He absolutely has the up arrow, and he's got a respectable rating there, 78 rush rating, best interior D-line rush rating we have on this team right now, and again, is going to be prominently out there on third downs. But he's got an opportunity to really surprise some people. And I love the David Onyemata, like, mentor pro comp idea with him. I think Onyemata was undrafted. Okay, I made that up. He was a 4th round pick, but came through the CFL. Like, he had an interesting path to his ascension, I think is fair to say that on Onyemata. Similar with Briggs, where he quickly changed teams at a young age and has had to kind of earn those opportunities. But really a nice player, even if he didn't crack the top of the graphic there, like easily could have, and deserves his spotlight. And then I still have to talk about Daryl Jackson Jr. out of Florida State. Was certainly a day 2 caliber prospect for me. I will say this, when I did my initial D-line rankings, I loved him as a top 50 player in this draft, and then I did end up catching his final game against Florida, and he turned me off in that game because I thought his motor and his pad level, and honestly his effort in that game, while Florida State's season was gone, still an in-state rivalry game, Daryl Jackson kind of played like he didn't give a shit in that game, and that was a turnoff, so I lowered him a little bit, but still someone I had, late 2, early 3rd round grade on. They get him at the top of the 4th round. And he's just the definition of potential, man. When he had his dominant games, it wasn't even like, he was inconsistent week to week, but he had games where full games of just dominant defensive tackle. Like, if he was able to play like that dude in some of those big games, he would have been a 1st round pick because he's tall, he's got length, he's athletic, he's incredibly strong. He plays the run and the rush with all the traits and honestly, largely the technique you want to see. I think he's got a bag of pass rush moves. I think he's really good at stacking and peeking and shedding. He can let his pad level come up, which you want to see him improve. It may never be great because he's a taller player, but for a 4th round pick to get a guy with this upside that I really think is just, again, an Aaron Glenn idea of like, we just got to get this guy focused and motivated, and you could end up with a really nice starter in the 4th round. And he's going to have to, work his ass off to get on the field with the 4 guys already ahead of him. So it's a really cozy infrastructure. I think the biggest potential for Aaron Glenn to impress and be worth his salt as a head coach and defensive mind and motivator is with T'Vondre Sweat and Daryl Jackson. So really fun to see that. And hell, throw Mazi Smith into that conversation. I'm not counting on Mazi Smith, but I just did my 2023 draft regrades, and he was one of my biggest misses. A guy that just got his money and seemingly kind of checked out. He has been nothing like the dominant player he was at Michigan that made him a good, worthy 1st round selection for the Cowboys he was a throw-in in that trade for Quinnen Williams. That's enough time on Mazi Smith because I'm not betting on him at this point, but he was a 1st round pick for a reason. It just has not gone anywhere close to how you could have imagined. But yeah, really fun D-line. It's hard to rank them too high because none of these guys are superstars, right? But you get some development from some of these guys, and then if Aaron Glenn can really prove that he can position these guys and fully craft this and have this beautiful rotation, this D-line could absolutely outperform the 19th to 24th best D-line in the league. Maybe not top 10, but be certainly top half in the league as a realistic hope for this team. Yeah, I could absolutely see that. So it is a good defensive line. And then we go to the linebackers, and they upgraded here too in a really fun way. One of the all-decade most underrated players, Demario Davis. I could not believe that he didn't go back to the Saints. In fact, Saints fans could not believe that he didn't go back. But he chooses to believe in Aaron Glenn, to come up here to the Jets where his career started, and reunite with Aaron Glenn, who he would have spent some time with in those earlier years with the Saints. Demario Davis, though, I call him the ageless wonder. And he can absolutely still play. And just to wrap up the offseason changes, again, I said upgraded. He was their addition. They lost Quincy Williams, who we just talked in the Browns deep dive. Very bad year for the Jets, got benched at times. This group is upgraded. But yeah, Demario Davis, dude, the ageless wonder, in my opinion. Still, to me, in the conversation with all pro players, Jordan Brooks and Jack Campbell especially, and maybe Fred Warner, because I think Fred's run defense is in this tier. Fred takes it to another level with all the other stuff he does. But I think there's a conversation for 4 players who the best run defending linebacker in the league is. And the only reason Demario doesn't consistently get in that conversation is because he's so old, and you just think he's going to regress at some point. Maybe the Saints thought it was finally going to happen this upcoming season, and maybe it does. But I'm certainly done putting a red arrow on Demario Davis in this series and saying, yeah, father time comes for everybody, because right now it certainly has not come for the 37-year-old Demario Davis, who's coming off one of his better years as a run defender in the NFL, and he's a player that doesn't depend on speed like so many great linebackers in the NFL. He wins with this. For the audio listeners, I'm pointing to my brain. The urgency that he breaks things down, and at his age, it's like Peyton Manning at the end of his career, Tom Brady at the end of his career. Like, you're not going to run anything that Demario Davis hasn't, at least that he doesn't understand the core philosophy of what you're doing. Teams run crazy shit all the time, so you're going to see some new stuff, no matter how much you've played. But like, you're not fooling Demario Davis, and not only does he come prepared and has this just vast Rolodex of knowledge of what teams are trying to do to him, he processes and reacts to things extremely well too, and he plays fast without any hesitation. And even if he's lost half a step, which he was a great athlete to begin with, like, he's still a very good athlete out there, just not maybe an elite athlete. He's everywhere, dude, and I'm really stunned that the Saints didn't do what they needed to do to keep him around, because the Saints' run defense vastly overachieved last year, and I think this dude is a huge reason for that, like half the reason, if not more, for that. And the Jets get that guy. And I can't undersell this signing, because I think if Aaron Glenn saves his job, it will be because Demario Davis agreed to come play for him. I genuinely believe that. I think he is one of the rare linebackers that elevates a defense. And when you can find a guy like this, like we saw with the Saints last year, who I had ranked as like by far the worst run defense in the league last year, and they finished middle of the pack. He brings something that, like I said, only a small handful of other players are able to bring to the table. And he's big and like gets off blocks too, and he hits hard. Like, he's awesome, man. Maybe not the most impactful blitzer from a consistency basis. And yes, if you really isolate him out in space, he's gettable in coverage, but he's still in the right place at the right time and knows what he's doing out there. He's far from a liability in coverage, but it's really the run defense that is going to be dropped in here, and I think will help this go from, if you're just talking about the first half of the year last year, it was a good run defense. There's a chance that this Jets run defense could really elevate things, force teams into a tough spot in those third downs, not able to kind of dictate things on the ground. So I really can't say enough good things about this signing. I think it was a major gift for Aaron Glenn and the Jets for Demario to agree to come back here where his career started. I'm excited about that. I am. Unless 37 years old, it is that fall off, which is still technically possible, but I'm not projecting it. And then the other beauty here, I wax poetic about this new look Jets linebacker room, is now Jamien Sherwood can truly be the best version of himself. They gave Jamien Sherwood a big contract when this new staff came in, and Aaron Glenn watched Jamien Sherwood and was like, I love this dude's speed. I love the way he flies to the ball. Yeah, he's a little bit undersized. He's not perfect, but I want that guy in my defense. Realistically, do you want him to be your every down middle linebacker and, eat things up in the middle of the tackles? No, he plays about 215 pounds. He was drafted as a safety. Of course, he has some limitations in that sense. But with DeMario being the guy that's going to be at the forefront, taking on blocks, Jamien Sherwood able to be aligned in more weak side linebacker formations or be from the weak side position, chasing plays down from the backside. That's what he's elite at. And with DeMario next to him, allowing Sherwood to play a little bit more free and loose in coverage and let him tee off as a blitzer and just let DeMario deal with the floor raising tasks and let Jamien Sherwood, it's like Patrick Queen, but a better version of Patrick Queen, a more instinctive, better player than Patrick Queen. But the same idea, when Queen got to play next to Roquan, he actually wasn't horrible. Jamien Sherwood goes from already pretty good last year in a you got to be the guy type of role to now the guy is there and you get to just play free and loose. I think that's awesome, man. So I even put the up arrow on Jamien Sherwood. We saw Quincy Williams here a few years ago, and I think CJ Mosley was still there that all-pro year. Fly around, making plays, different defensive scheme and all that, but played at got enough production to warrant like all-pro voting. Sherwood could have that type of year. The one thing I will say, just to not overhype Jamien Sherwood, is that you would think he would have been a more consistent coverage player by this point because he was a college safety. He really hasn't figured things out to like get to the ball and be an impactful player in that sense. Like he definitely can move and like man up tight ends and man up running backs and cover ground. He's not a bad coverage linebacker, but I do think the zone IQ and just navigating his way in front of passes has been more of a challenge for him. So even if the role is more favorable, there's still something about him that hasn't quite clicked in that sense. And maybe that's a reason why he is a little bit more what you see is what you get as an undersized run and chase physical presence. But I'm willing to, for this year, put the up arrow on him and say him as a compliment to Demario Davis is chef's kiss. Now, depth here, you have, I guess, Kiko Mauinoa, Francisco. Is it really Francis and Francisco Mauinoa as brothers? Am I just realizing that that's where it was at? Imagine growing up in that household, trying to keep that straight. But Kiko Mauinoa here was drafted day 3 last year and got on the field, was a very raw kind of developmental linebacker and played like it when he had to get on the field last year. So hoping that the developmental arc can come from him, but he's developmental depth. You got Michael Walker, who's bounced around. God, I don't even know how many teams he's played for at this point, but I would imagine if this team is competitive, they'd probably go to Michael Walker over Mauinoa, who's just a little bit more proven, has just been inconsistent throughout his career. But he's honestly, as far as linebacker depth goes, Michael Walker as an LB3 is functional. But if this team's down bad, they might just go to Mauinoa and see if he can develop. You have Marcelino Ball coming out of Indiana. Hasn't really broken through to be anything yet. Some undrafted types. It's NFL linebacker depth. Like, there's not really enough good linebackers to fill out the starters in the league. So it is what it is. But I love this starting duo. The Jets come out ranking very nicely at linebacker. Actually, top 5, ranking 4th to 5th for overall linebacker. Top 3, 1st through 3rd for run defense. And then 10th to 14th for linebacker coverage, where you got a few more questions in that sense, but really a nice unit in the middle of this defense. And then the secondary, where they continue to make additions here. So at cornerback, I said slightly upgraded, factoring in again that Sauce Gardner was a trade deadline move. They did get about a half season from him, so that plays into the equation here. But even with that, 2nd round pick on D'Angelo Pons, Nashawn Wright, projecting full seasons from those guys. I still said slightly upgraded from what you're hoping for in that cornerback room. And then at safety, definitely upgraded. They went and got Minkah Fitzpatrick from the Dolphins, really as a contract dump because it seems Minkah wanted some new money and the Jets were willing to give it to him. Made no sense for the Dolphins there. Interdivision trade, a rare interdivision trade, shows you how much the Dolphins really care about winning this year. But yeah, Minka maybe not what he once was, but still a really good player and a good addition to the safety room. They also draft VJ Payne as a project in the 7th round and Dane Belton as a cheap signing. They did lose Tony Adams, who's been an okay player for them, but I said upgraded at safety prominently there with Minka Fitzpatrick. Maybe not the tremendous additions in the secondary that we talked about with the front 6, but still nice. Nice way to round out the defensive outlook of off seasons and really just overall across the board outside of quarterback and coach, which obviously matter. This team got a lot better on paper over the offseason. And that can be a sign of a team that might shatter their deep dive ranking. But let's look at this secondary before I talk about predictions and that kind of stuff. And while this unit added some pieces, this is definitely the group for this defense that I guess I have my concerns and has a lot more to prove. And honestly, I don't see a ton of upside here. It's not a horrible unit. They actually come in a very large cluster of just like solid secondaries. They rank 16th to 26th for DB coverage. It shows you that there's just kind of this middle cluster of okay units. Probably not a ton of like major red flags, but maybe not that much to get excited about. And that's really where the Jets secondary is and might finish as well. But let's get into it, starting at the cornerback room. So Brandon Stevens actually started strong on the Jets last year, and then, maybe he just got caught up in the suck down the stretch, but I also can't just ignore how he finished his Ravens career. I could not believe the Jets signed him, and honestly, at first, when they had Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner was here, Brandon Stevens didn't have to be the number one all the time, though I think Sauce missed a couple games in there, and there's a couple games where Stevens had to be the one, but yeah, like he had some good moments where he was not getting abused in coverage, which is a big departure from what he was in the final year in Baltimore, where teams literally, when they saw the Ravens on the schedule, they just said, "Where's Brandon Stevens? Let's go at that guy." You couldn't really do that. Like, not that he was shut down in coverage, but it's not like he never had his wins, and we certainly saw some good pass breakups and some solid games from him. And then I do think as the season really went on, he was less of a strength for this secondary. Realistically, Stevens probably is just one of those inconsistent low-end CB2 types, which is better than I thought he was when they signed him. We kind of saw that in Baltimore, right? Like, he had a good year in there, he had a really bad year in there. Last year, really good parts of the season, some less dominant parts of the season. But he is, at this point, I think, what you see is what you get, mid-range CB2 that's probably going to have some good games and probably going to have some bad games. And that, I think, is a pretty fair projection on him. Nahshon Wright, I have a little bit more of a take on. He gets the yellow arrow for me. I think Nahshon Wright would be on a list, and maybe I need to compile this list and make a video of it if I have time. I think Nahshon Wright is at the very top of a list of regression candidates for 2026. And it's not that hard to predict that, because anytime you take a guy that really came out of nowhere and had a bunch of picks, but the underlying coverage metrics actually aren't that good on him, almost every time that guy regresses. Like to a T. This is a reduced version of, say, Trayvon Diggs, where he had all those picks in Dallas, and people like me were saying he's a little overrated because he's actually like top of the league in yards allowed every year. He's just got really good ball skills and happens to convert some interceptions that other corners maybe aren't getting. But those interceptions almost always come back to earth. And then if you're only getting 3 picks instead of 8 or 9, you end up with a guy that is kind of just getting picked on. And you still got to be in position to get picks. So Nahshon Wright is not a good coverage player. That's why the Bears let him go, and it's why the Jets didn't have to pay much to get him. The league knows he's a regression candidate. Again, it's not a hot take to say that. You do still have to commend him for getting his head around, finding the ball, having the ball skills that some wide receivers you wish would have. And if you put the ball in his area, he can make offenses pay for it. But you're counting on quarterbacks making mistakes oftentimes and forcing balls that just aren't there. And that's very fluky. So yes, Nahshon Wright's a regression candidate, but that's baked into his rating for me with a 73 rating, because if you do get 8 or 9 picks, you're making an impact that's bigger than, say, a 73 rating would represent there. So maybe the Jets can squeeze another miracle season out of him and get a bigger impact from him. And then whether or not they want to pay him off of that, that's a future conversation to be had there. But there is a full spectrum with Nahshon Wright where he manages to repeat because he does have that trump card of excellent ball skills that a lot of corners just don't have. But there's also a world where he gets benched by week 6 because the picks aren't coming and teams are picking on him, and you see a guy that's just, he's rigid in space, doesn't really have the requisite cover skills to consistently play as a starting corner in the NFL. He's also a physical player. I'll give him credit there. It's not just the picks. He forced some fumbles and gets involved in the run game. So, like, turnovers are very volatile. I think it's extremely funny that the Jets, who got just shredded for not having a single interception from their secondary, how funny that the Jets are like, we might win one game. And Nahshon Wright, maybe he is horrible and leads the league in yards allowed, but God damn it, he's going to have an interception. I just get a laugh out of that. And I don't think it's pure satire. Like, I think that's part of the thinking that went into it. But there's no guarantee that he actually starts as your outside corner. I want to talk about D'Angelo Pons next as kind of a hybrid conversation here, because I think he could be their starting slot. A lot of times undersized corners get profiled into the slot. I don't think that's necessarily a given. Glenn used Amik Robertson really all over the field in 2024 for the Lions. D'Angelo Pons played outside corner largely for Indiana. I know it was a different regime, but DJ Reed at about 5'9" was an outside corner for this team. I think they might view him as one of their best 3, and they just put him in the slot where I think Pons can hold his own. But he can play outside and probably projects best as an outside corner, especially if he were to be playing in more of an off-zone quarters-heavy defense, which is fascinating, like, as a fit. Pons can do a little bit of everything, and it's not like Indiana wouldn't have him run press jam coverage. I think he kind of infamously, like, played great press man coverage against Denzel Boston. So that's clearly what Aaron Glenn likes about him, is just like Glenn was himself, an undersized, frisky, scrappy corner that can just play everywhere and bring that mentality. I love it as a fit. And I actually have the up arrow on Pons. I totally get him as a fit somewhere in this secondary. But I do think realistically, if you're not an off-zone system, that is typically where we see the undersized perimeter corners having success, because they get to play out in space, not have to match the physical demands of seeing your classic like 6'3", 6'4" perimeter style wide receivers. Every undersized corner is just a little bit different though. And Pons kind of has some of the positives of all these different guys. Like, he's got the scrappy friskiness that Amik Robertson has. He's got the off-zone instincts that like a DJ Reed or Darius Williams has. He's got the speed that like Marcus Jones in New England has. Now, most of those guys never became like bona fide CB1 types. I think typically we see that lack of size eventually does matter and limits you from being like Sauce Gardner or true CB1, but he was a mid-second round pick. You're not necessarily counting on him to be that. I think Pons' role can be a little bit liquid, and he'll find his way, I think, sooner rather than later, as just a solid starting corner. I think it was a really fun pick. But yeah, if Wright and Stevens are starting, it makes a ton of sense that Pons would be the slot, because neither Stevens or Wright really project as a slot, and I think Pons can do it. He's a little more unproven in that sense, and anytime you're taking a tiny corner and sticking him in the slot full time, you're going to have some questions about getting overwhelmed in the run game and, you know, tackling bigger backs and that kind of stuff. Like, he plays with his absolute hair on fire, but does he get physically overwhelmed by NFL competition. It's certainly possible, and we've seen that from most of those smaller slot corners. So he is a very fun second-round pick that I think will work out here, even if I don't think he has like superstar upside or anything like that, and that he went around where he should have gone, which is perfectly good and well. And honestly, another reason he might play slot is that the other guy that might find his way into the starting lineup is also more of an outside corner in Azariah Thomas. Thomas was a guy that I had some hesitations with, and it really is because of the long speed. And like, look, I, as much as anyone, viewers of the channel know this, like, I will say very often that 40 time is deeply overrated. I don't say that about cornerback, especially from a team that wants to run a lot of press, jam, cover one coverage, where you're not talking about an off zone slower corner. All the slow corners that have found success, Josh Norman, Kamari Lassiter to an extent in Houston. You got like Rasul Douglas in that conversation. Go back to like Josh Norman. These were all like the outlier 4.6 speed corners. They were zone, typically off-zone corners that had that extra 10 yards of cushion. Cover one press man, not only are you asked to get up in your guy's face, keep stride, and prevent vertical stack, if you're running cover one, you don't have that safety help over the top on the outside. And smart teams are going to go at you. I thought Florida State teams just didn't challenge them, and probably should have. And in the NFL, it's going to be different. You're dealing with better vertical threats, better vertical passers. And I'm not going to say teams necessarily abused him in that sense, but he was an extremely inconsistent cover corner. And it's not just running with go balls down the field, right? Like, speed's going to impact this position every snap for the most part from a coverage standpoint. And you saw a guy that he is grabby. He does find himself out of position and having to panic, and just very inconsistent in that sense. Like, he's physical. He plays with the best technique you could possibly imagine. He has quick feet for a big guy. But I had my concerns with him coming in as a guy that got a lot of hype. And I think it's fair to say the Jets at this point have some concerns with him as well. He's still in a position to compete. And honestly, as a starting point, maybe he is used as a dime corner, as a tight end eraser. I like that for him. If it's just he's the Trey Flowers role from those championship Bengals defenses under Lou Anarumo, you can still get some value out of that role. If you're going against Dalton Kincaid in this division or some of these crazy tight end mismatch problems, I still think he could absolutely like play a critical role in that sense. But as a consistent three down starting nickel corner, or not slot corner, but in your base nickel defense, like a starting corner. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. He has to really, the margin for error with his speed is very, very thin. And I think there was a lot of moments in his rookie season where it's like he can make a play here or there, but he also had a lot more bad than good in my opinion. So we're still learning about Azariah Thomas and if he can be this outlier with just not a lot of speed at the corner position, but he's a fascinating conversation nonetheless. And if Nahshon Wright really struggles, it's not like Nahshon Wright's got a lot of speed and coverage ability. We could easily see Azariah Thomas plugged into that spot. And I'm not, even if I was lower on him, I'm still like willing to give him a shot, right? But those were my concerns on him coming in. I haven't seen enough to change that. You do have like a long list of names after that, like Jarvis Brownlee. He's an option in the slot. He is a psychopath. He's not a great cover player, but if you don't want Thomas or Wright out there, your best secondary might be D'Angelo Pons on the outside and then Brownlee in the slot. That is something we could see. I think Brownlee's pretty maxed out, just not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, but love his energy. Him and Pons in the same secondary would be a lot of fun to watch. So keep an eye out for that. Quantez Stiggers at this point, kind of a CFL dart throw on day 3. At this point, probably not counting on him, but he's got some traits. Samuel Womack, another guy that's played in the slot and played pretty well for what he is. See if he makes the team. Trey Brown, very Aaron Glenn style corner, another kind of undersized, frisky guy that's had some good moments. So they have depth in that sense at the cornerback room, but not a ton of upside either. And you're probably talking about this as, outside of quarterback, probably the group that they're going to have to continue to fill out in time. Pons, I think, will be a part of the long-term plan somewhere, and then I think it's pretty likely we're still talking about them needing a couple of corners for the future plans here. And then at safety as well, probably going to need some future planning here too. You do have Minkah Fitzpatrick, who gets a 3-year extension, and I think he'll come close to playing that out. You'll at least get 2 more good years out of him, if not 3. Eventually, you're going to need to replace him. He turns 30 at the end of this season. His football body is probably 31, 32. He's came into the league young and has played a lot of snaps. I think with Minkah, because you see him traded for a 7th-round pick, and you're like, whoa, that's like, putting him out on the street and saying, someone come get him. I think what we've seen with Minkah is a combination of he's slowed down a little bit, and he probably was just always a little bit overrated. The first-round value, the Alabama, cool player, had some high interception seasons, and honestly, I made a video around like 2020 that I think has aged well I think I titled it Lucky or Lurky, going through Minkah's interceptions and talking about how, like, he's a good cover player, but is this someone that realistically should have been a 5-time Pro Bowler and a 3-time first-team All-Pro? I don't know. I think history is telling us Minkah probably a little bit of an overrated player, and you see him traded away the last couple of years. Like, now that he's not this household name necessarily anymore, his name probably carries a little bit more weight than the impact he gives you to a defense. Like, in reality, he is just a good free safety. Doesn't bust a lot of coverages, doesn't make a ton of plays on the back end, takes good angles to the ball. Last year was his worst tackling season, missing almost 16% of his tackles. He's been in the single digits 3 years before that. So we definitely saw some regression as a tackler last year. We'll see if he can flip that back around. Sometimes that can just be a little volatile. But he generally gets guys to the ground, takes good angles, doesn't blow a lot of coverages. Good kind of standard deep safety. Sort of a Cam Bynum, for example, is like, realistically, Minkah Fitzpatrick, what Cam Bynum's been the last 2 years, pretty much the same player. It's just a big name. Doesn't mean he's a bad player. He's a very good player. You need a safety like this on the back end, and he raises the floor of a safety room that had a lot of issues last year. And I think getting floor raisers at all 3 spots matters for Aaron Glenn in let's call it what it is, a shit or get off the pot season for Aaron Glenn, this super young roster. I think for Aaron Glenn's sake, and just to have this defense show some positive signs, you added some veterans on the D-line. You bring Demario Davis in the middle of your defense, and then you just drop Minkah Fitzpatrick on the back end. You're not really going to have any regrets about that, right? So I like the acquisition. I wouldn't look at this as a Jets fan and be like, oh my God, and we get Minkah Fitzpatrick to like take this defense over the edge. That's just realistically, that's not ever really who Minkah Fitzpatrick has been, and certainly hasn't been in the last 3 years. Still a very good aging player there. I do have some questions about the other safety. Andre Sisco has been kind of living off of his early career success in Jacksonville, and talk about a player that might still be benefiting from some bonus interception opportunities. But yeah, Jacksonville didn't really want him around anymore. The Jets signed him last year, missed a bunch of tackles, just 1 pass breakup on 500 snaps. 3 touchdowns allowed as well. Last year was definitely his worst year on a bad Jets team. Like, he was a solid player in Jacksonville. Big hitter, reasonable deep safety that has some size to play down in the box. I don't think Andre Sisco sucks, but he's definitely a guy that has... People have been waiting on him to kind of emerge as a bigger name than he's been able to produce as for a while now. Was a really fun prospect coming out of Syracuse. Just hasn't been able to kind of take that next step, if you know what I'm saying. I will say this. His overall style reminds me a lot of Kirby Joseph, who obviously did what he did with Aaron Glenn in Detroit. Didn't happen last year, and he got hurt, but I think as a Band-Aid at this point, that's probably what you're talking about is Andre Cisco, and they brought him back, I think, 1 year, like $6 million. Like, okay, like we'll get through another year with Andre Cisco, but I think you're going to deal with some missed tackles, which weren't just a big issue for him last year. He's been right about 14% the last 3 years, going back to his time in Jacksonville. So, like, that's been an issue for him, and just not a consistent cover player either. But an okay safety. And I think we can move on there. I like Malachi Moore, not the fastest guy, and certainly unproven, but I love the energy he plays with. I don't know necessarily if, where, and how Malachi is going to get on the field. If Cisco really struggles, we might see it. But yeah, Moore just doesn't have like a ton of playmaking and range from a coverage standpoint, but really quick feet and a good tackler, smart player that started a bazillion games at Alabama. Wouldn't be stunned if he gets out there instead of Cisco as maybe a little bit more of a stabilizing force as opposed to Cisco that's a little more week to week. Dane Belton, probably more of a special teams addition, honestly, but he has gotten a lot of playing time and has emerged as a pretty solid run defending safety. The coverage instincts for him have never really been there, unfortunately. VJ Payne, a 7th round pick. I very much disliked VJ Payne as a prospect, someone that got a lot of like early day 3 buzz because he ran extremely fast. I will call it like I see it. Like, VJ Payne's tape was some of the worst in this draft at any position. I don't think he's a good football player, but taking speed in the 7th round, sure. Zach Hicks, who covers the Colts, suggested moving him to outside corner. And he actually has some interesting potential in a press man cover 1 system. I'm curious if that's the plan for him. On the back end, he does nothing for me. Everything wrong with a safety he had. Missed tackles, bad angles, lack of anticipation in the back end. Really tough safety tape, honestly. And then Dean Clark had to play a little bit last year too. Not sure if he'll make the team this time around, but it is technically a deep secondary, but not much star talent at all. And I don't really think you're going to get it. Even if I put the up arrow on D'Angelo Pons, I still think his upside is realistically capped as like a good second corner. We talked about Minka as more of a household name, but a very good player. And then it's honestly, I think, just temporary Band-Aids for the most part until we can continue to build this group out into 2027 and beyond. But certainly a group that you look at Aaron Glenn as a secondary coach, and hopefully with more in front of these guys, Aaron Glenn can maximize these guys and end up with this being an average overall secondary for the year. So where did this Jets defense land overall? Certainly better than last year. 21st for overall defense, and pretty damn encouraging from a run defense standpoint. Actually 9th for me for their run defense as a starting point for this defense. I do think Aaron Glenton's going to be able to weaponize this unit with a lot of different bodies with the help of Demario Davis and get teams into 3rd downs. Now, will their blitz designs be good? Will his secondary hold up? Is this pass rush explosive enough to really be a good pass defense where they were probably the worst pass defense in the league last year? We'll see. That's part of Aaron Glenn's job here, is not just to stop the run. This is a passing league, and the Jets got to find a way to stop the pass. They come in 29th for pass defense. Improvements from where they ended last year, but you're obviously hoping that they finish above that, and I think there's room for them to be a better pass defense than that, certainly. And I think Aaron Glenn is probably the biggest wild card in terms of determining that. Some aspects of the pass rush could be more impactful than I have them ranked right now, 23rd to 27th again for pass rush. I do think overall the secondary is largely going to be just an adequate group that maybe doesn't have horrible weak spots, but a lack of consistent, call it shutdown or better lockdown production. A bunch of guys essentially that I think you can get in the secondary. So the scheme is, of course, going to be a huge part of that. And certainly with the run defense, like I said, getting you into more of those 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9s. Let's freaking see what Aaron Glenn can do with those situations and more talent to work with this year. So before we summarize everything and get into some of my final predictions for this Jets team, let's talk a little special teams. And just recently, this team did address kicker more significantly, bringing in Jason Sanders to replace Nick Folk, who was actually pretty good last year, but definitely younger with Jason Sanders. Good signing there. And as we talk Jets special teams, I mean, hey, I don't know if I can say hang the banner because they ranked 4th for final special teams projections here. But really the only thing dragging this down is the Jets of it all, that overall team, coach, and culture, that sort of benefit of the doubt slider that shows up in different pockets of these rankings calculations. The Jets, not really much of a surprise there. We showed it earlier with the coaching segment, but it shows up again here. Like, look, the Jets, the Browns, those two teams, it ain't rocket science. It's not a hot take. Like, those teams have been laughingstocks for a reason. They have been the opposite of earning the benefit of the doubt. So that's really the only reason this isn't the number 1 ranked special teams, because, and maybe the kicker is closer to like really good in terms of being elite with the Jason Sanders signing, but man, this was an awesome special teams last year. That is an area of this team that, credit to everybody involved, Aaron Glenn, special teams coordinator, you name it, got this thing figured out, and you kind of got the whole package here, man. You bring in Jason Sanders, should be a really good kicker, ranked 14th for me there. You have what was the 4th graded punter over the last 2 years in Austin McNamara. You have probably the best kick returner in the NFL in Kenny Nwangu. And Isaiah Williams was one of the best punt returners in the NFL last year. And he's got certainly shiftiness and instincts in that sense to repeat there. So you got all the specialists. And at least last year, the Aaron Glenn physical mentality, I think the kneecap biting mentality did permeate deep enough through the mindset of this team where they were covering kicks, and DVOA had them as the number 1 special teams. PFF had them as the 4th best special teams. So, hey, at least hang the banner for the division, because the Jets have won the AFC East for special teams. But that's where they came out there. Let's tie a ribbon on all of this, recap our strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors, and then we'll take a look at their schedule and some of my final predictions for the Jets here. But this screen looks a little bit different than some of our other teams in the sense that the Jets' weaknesses category is much shorter than all these teams we've done. I only have 2 definitive weaknesses right now for the Jets, which speaks to the direction that this roster is heading and how they've done a good job this offseason, like filling out their holes. But unfortunately, those weaknesses are probably the 2 most, not probably, I would say definitely the 2 most important aspects of any football team: quarterback and coaching, in addition to the kind of culture, the benefit of the doubt slider, the Jets of it all. Quarterback, coaching, and culture are your weaknesses for the Jets. Fortunately, that quarterback has a chance to not be a weakness. Geno Smith does show up as a wild card for me. We're just a year removed from him being a top 20 quarterback in back-to-back seasons, which is obviously not a weakness. If you can just get that Geno Smith back, okay, now you only have 1 weakness, which is coaching and culture. And then maybe Aaron Glenn does surprise us and gets this thing going in the right direction, in which case we're really going on the right path, where this team might have no weaknesses. But furthermore, this team currently doesn't have many true strengths. The only aspect of this team that I can comfortably currently say is a strength is linebacker, a group that we really hyped up. Top 5 linebacker room in the league with Demario Davis and Jamie Sherwood. And then special teams that we just typed up. Okay, linebacker and special teams aren't exactly the most prominent areas that are going to help you win football games. So realistically, you're more talking about eliminating those weaknesses and just being a really steady, high-floor team heading in the right direction. But there are a couple of elements of this team that are also showing up as wild cards that maybe could become strengths for this team as early as this season. I think both the weapons and the offensive line, with how much talent they've invested in there, and there's really not any of these young pieces that have given us too much reason for hesitation. Like, obviously, Cooper and Sadiq are rookies. Maybe they do give us reason for hesitation this year, but really promising young picks. there's so much with this infrastructure to get excited about. And maybe they show up as strengths this year, but realistically, like, probably not immediate strengths. And hopefully, by the time this team's ready to compete, you're talking about this as one of the best surrounding casts in the league. And I don't think that is, if you want to get excited and have hope as a Jets fan, I know Jets fan and hope, it's been a toxic combination for a long time. So be careful, I guess. But I don't think it's unreasonable to have hope that the Jets could have one of the best surrounding infrastructures for a young quarterback coming in the NFL. And that's how you are supposed to be able to do this thing. Doesn't tend to work out for the Jets, but they're doing things the right way, as I've said before in this video. But let's take a look at their schedule and a little bit more about what we're predicting this year for the Jets. I definitely think this team is still a year away, maybe from being a year away. It just kind of depends how good that rookie quarterback they almost inevitably end up with next year is. I do think the floor for this team is here, and it's not a bad schedule. They have a lot of winnable games. I actually have them favored in 3 games with 3 teams we've already done the deep dives on: Cleveland, Miami, and Las Vegas, all as home games for the Jets. They also get Miami, Tennessee, Arizona on the road. Maybe you steal an extra game in this division because division games are weird. But this certainly is not the hardest of schedules for the Jets. So I actually think, and this is kind of the inverse of what we said with the Browns, where it's probably a best case scenario for the Browns after trading Myles Garrett away, that they just suck this year and win 2 games and end up with the number 1 pick in a QB-rich draft. I am a little bit worried for the Jets that realistically, even if you keep Aaron Glenn's job and you're more competitive and this team isn't as bad as some people think, with a schedule that's actually kind of easy, do you end up winning 5 or 6 games and you end up with the 6th pick again and all the quarterbacks go before you get to drop that into this perfect infrastructure? I'm a little worried about that, to be honest. Like, if you want big picture and being realistic about what this team really needs, this team needs to win 2 games this year. And look, I get it. I'm like this big Aaron Glenn hater. Do you really believe in your heart of hearts that Aaron Glenn is the right coach to send into year 3 with a rookie quarterback that was maybe the 4th quarterback in his draft class? That kind of reeks of Jets repeat being the Jets. Okay, I'm going to predict this team wins 5 games. With this schedule, with an improved defense for Aaron Glenn, that maybe this is enough to talk yourself into saving Aaron Glenn's job. That could be a short-term positive on the Jets. And it's not all doom and gloom for, some of the things we've talked about with what they're building with their offensive infrastructure. It's never all destined to fail. But is that a best case scenario? The Jets get the 5th or 6th pick in the draft and we've got a 3rd year of Aaron Glenn. I think I've made myself pretty clear. I would rather this team just suck, fire Aaron Glenn by week 9, and really, really head into 2027 with a lot to get excited about and a huge sales pitch to hopefully a really good, you might be able to get the best coach on the market if things play out that way. So just some things to consider if you're a Jets fan watching these games. Is the best thing that this team win games? Now, it depends on your perspective and your opinion on that, I guess. It's fascinating to say the least. And that's all kind of reflected too in my floor and ceiling for the Jets too. Like, I don't think this team has a horrible floor. We talked about it. Like, they eliminated a lot of their weaknesses, and this schedule's pretty easy. Like, I think this team wins at least 4 games. And I don't know that their ceiling is all that crazy. It's a little bit higher. Like, if everything goes right, I think this team could be in the mix for a wild card. But ultimately, I said 8 wins for their ceiling, which would be pretty exciting if you're a Jets fan, if they do get up to that level, even if you're going to have some questions about who's your long-term plan at quarterback. At least that's a world where it's like, okay, Aaron Glenn is at least a good defensive coach and got this thing from a culture perspective on the right path as well. And probably like, yeah, these weapons are sweet. But let's conclude here with my team superlative picks So for team MVP, I think it's Demario Davis. I kind of talked about it like this being such a luxury for Aaron Glenn to get Demario Davis, who I think is just going to lift this defense up to being a much better version than they were last year. Just what he's going to do for the run defense alone is still meaningful. We talk about it being a passing league, but this team's going to take a step up with him. And I think you look back on it and you're like, that was huge that we got him for the 2026 New York Jets. Kind of makes your head circle a little bit, and then you're like, okay, great. We got better on defense. We keep Aaron Glenn. Not to beat a dead horse here, but is that technically what's best for this team? Is he comes in, saves Aaron Glenn's job, and then is 38 years old heading into 2027 as you have the 6th pick in the draft? Well, worth the debate, I think. But yeah, I think he's going to be great for the 2026 Jets. I did say for biggest wild card, Aaron Glenn, because if he can prove that when he's got better pieces around him, that he can be one of these more prominent, uplifting defensive figures, maybe not exactly what Mike McDonald's been for the Seahawks, but what Jesse Minter's done for the Chargers defense, and, Brian Flores for the Vikings. Like, if he can be closer to that, I don't know that there's a whole lot of evidence that he can be necessarily, but if he can really lock in as a head coach when not a whole lot of people believe in him, it's not just me that's an Aaron Glenn doubter. You're talking about this being a pretty nasty defense on top of an offense that has stuff to work around, right? So I'm not picking quarterbacks for that award. It's definitely Geno Smith from a player standpoint. But yeah, I said Aaron Glenn is this team's biggest wild card, and a wild card in the sense of like, if he just stinks, you're going to know it early and probably fire him. So it's, I think, wild card. You talk about both ends of the spectrum, high volatility, big swing factors for these teams. I had to say Aaron Glenn, man, at the end of the day. Breakout offensive player. I don't go with rookies here for the breakout offense because we've got the best rookie award as well. But I actually said Mason Taylor, and it might not show up in the statistics category. It might not be a player that gets a ton of love, but I believe in him developing as a blocker. I believe in what 12 personnel can do for any team and this Jets team. And I think the real ball knowers that watch the Jets are going to walk away really appreciating what Mason Taylor unlocks for this team, even if the ball is not ultimately going into his hands. So wanted to give him some love there because I think a lot of people are just going to forget about him. Breakout defense, I did say Jawan Briggs, and it's not even that I necessarily am predicting he's going to be all that much better than he was last year because he was really good last year. But this was, number one, just kind of a tougher award to pick for the defense. I look at that side of the ball with the players, and I think for the most part, there's a lot of guys that have already established themselves that are coming in here. But I think Jawan Briggs will break out in the sense of if the Jets are more watchable, you're going to get some eyeballs on Jawan Briggs. And if he repeats what he did in a second season, you're going to see people say, wait, this isn't just some cute, 7th round acquisition that had a good year. This guy's legit. He's a real building block for this defense. So more from a public recognition standpoint, I went with Jawan Briggs, but he might get a little bit better as a player. Best rookie, I did say Kenyon Sadiq here. I'm a believer in Sadiq. I love Omar Cooper. I don't know that the pie is going to be big enough for him to, I think Sadiq is going to get a bigger part of the pie. You already have Garrett Wilson there. It's not going to be, in my opinion, the most dynamic offense to begin with. So I love Omar Cooper. I'm obviously a little bit lower on David Bailey. I actually had Sadiq and Cooper higher on my big board than David Bailey. But I am a believer in Sadiq. I do hope that Frank Reich can be creative enough to utilize him correctly and get the ball into his hands. Fantasy MVP. This was certainly a hard one. I really struggled with this one because for this award, I bake in the value. And I think Breece Hall's going to have a pretty solid season, probably pretty close to what he did last year, but he's, you got to pay a big price to get Breece Hall. He's RB 14. That's about right. That's ironically exactly where I had him for like his real position rank. So sure, draft Breece Hall. I don't think there's a ton of like value there. These wide receivers, like I think they're probably priced appropriate. Like Garrett Wilson's wide receiver 18. It's probably about right. Like maybe even a little steep. I love Omar Cooper, but I just don't know that the pie is going to be big enough for him. Kenny and Sadiq's going as tight end 19. I considered him. He probably would be my second choice here. We did just hype him up for best rookie. I'm buying Sadiq, so like he's kind of a co-owner of this award, I suppose. But the one guy I see like legitimate value in is Geno Smith, especially if you're like me and you only play in 2 quarterback leagues. Geno Smith is going as QB 29, like basically the last pick in your draft. He's got a large range of outcomes. You might end up cutting him by week 4. But do I think he's got a pretty good chance at finishing a decent bit higher than QB 29? I do. I mean, he's got big games in there. He's got weapons here. We'll see how much of a step the defense can make, but they might need him to sling the rock a good bit. So if I'm hunting for value, which is what this award is, I had to land on Geno Smith for fantasy MVP. Not an easy choice to make. It really is not, but that's my final pick there. But that is going to do it. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about the New York Jets for over 2 hours. You got to be either a battle-tested Jets fan or a true NFL sicko to do that. And with that, if you have not liked this video yet, please do. It really does help me out. It takes just a second. And a little football animation will pop up when you do, which is always fun. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you think of this ranking for the Jets? How many games do you think this team wins? Because this really is a fascinating ball club this year. So I want to hear your takes on it as well. And of course, let me know who you think comes in now with the number 27 ranking in this series coming up next within the next few days. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.